All right. Welcome to 6G Agenda. I'm Andrew, here to talk again about what they won't. And today I've got a special guest with me again, Ryan Gable. Welcome back, Ryan. He's a author and a longtime podcaster, about 16 years, isn't that right?
16 years, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Long
And
time.
if you need to get a recalibration on your critical analysis skills, I highly recommend checking out TST Radio. He's got amazing stuff. And I'll tell you, I mean, when I was trying to regain some critical thinking abilities, your show was very, very pertinent in that venture. So, highly recommend for anybody else who's looking for a different objective kind of approach to what's going on, a little bit of occult knowledge as well. And yeah, welcome on, Ryan. How you doing?
Doing great. I would like to get back, and I was just thinking about getting back to more of the occult knowledge because that is very important. I find myself trapped, unfortunately, in the kind of the illusion of perceptual debates about hot topic issues because I see both sides as being wrong in almost every case. So, other than that, I'm doing great.
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
that's the game. That's the mind war game.
That is the game, sir. That is the game. That's the mind game. That's the, as one radio host says, the info war. It really is an information war. It's also a thinking war. And even those folks apparently don't think anymore whatsoever. They just repeat talking points. I guess you
That's
live
right.
long enough to see yourself become the villain or you die a hero kind of a thing.
We've been seeing a lot of that lately, haven't we? And then, of course, we have the resurrection, of course, of people like Hunter Biden, right? So not everybody stays away forever, huh?
Yeah, what is that? What is that about?
Some people become heroes from being villains, right? So that's interesting. We've got complete inversion everywhere we look. And yeah, speaking of that, the info war, mind war thing, I've mentioned to you through DMs and stuff about Michael Aquino and the work of him and some of his mind war, psyop to mind war work. And yeah, sometime we'll have to get into that because that's exactly right. Alex Jones, I think nobody knew about Michael Aquino's mind war stuff back in the 90s. But Alex Jones happened to name his show InfoWars. And I think he knew about the Michael Aquino stuff, which just kind of reinforces that Fed kind of vibe that he has already. But anyway, so yeah, you've got a new book called Protocols of Goyim. Today I entitled this The Kosher Conspiracy, which is your subtitle. Played around with the lettering there. And yeah, so I want to kind of break down that book. I know that you have a very unique and nuanced understanding of the history of the Jewish, what should we call it? Various exoduses from different countries and the reasons why and the patterns that emerge every time. And so I'd love to cover some of that and, give some of that to the people that maybe aren't finding that in the people they listen to, which are anti-Zionist kind of classical, I believe to be Mossad operations, which is the anti-Zionist movement is a part of that as well. So anyway, what do you think?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack. First and foremost, what you just said, the last thing you just said, I believe is verifiable. It's not just an opinion.
Mm.
In fact, I know it's verifiable because if we look into the background of, say, the 750 million dollars that the Israeli government officially allocated for propaganda campaigns against the American public, that's in the Jerusalem Post, for example, or the Eight Front War, as they refer to it as. There have been different organizations and news outlets that have published reports about this. The Eighth Front War, which is billions of dollars that the Israelis are spending on propaganda against the American public, against Christians, against atheists, against everybody. Just make sure that they support Israel. So a lot of the anti-Israel, and yes, we're going to break down these terms and try to figure out what they mean tonight, but the anti-Israel movement, including the BDS movement, for example, the boycott, divestment, sanction movement in New York City, is actually run by the Democratic Socialists. The Democratic Socialists are not entirely, not exclusively, but one of their predominant bodies is the Jewish body. So yes, Jewish groups, this is completely verifiable. Jewish groups run a lot of the opposition to Israel. There are also, to be fair, plenty of Jewish groups that genuinely are opposed to Israel, genuinely are opposed to Netanyahu. However, again, to be fair and to be objective, some of those groups are only opposed for political reasons in the same way that some Americans only dislike the current president because of politics or like the current president because of politics. So that's one of the reasons. Some Jews dislike the administration because of religious beliefs, and because the administration doesn't really follow, any Israeli administration doesn't actually really follow what traditional Orthodox Jews believe and what they read about in their books. So to be objective about these things is really my motivation, and that's why, even though I'm being objective, or I'm attempting to be objective, there might be a slight bias in my writing, but the bias comes from Jewish sources, because I try to only cite Jewish sources like the Encyclopedia Judaica or various Jewish history websites, for example, or other encyclopedias, or I try to cite Jewish newspapers or Israeli newspapers. Although I guess if you're quoting almost any newspaper in the United States, it technically, I guess, is Jewish in some capacity. So maybe that's not a great example, but I tried to go to the sources of all that information because I want to see what the original report says. I mean, you could look at, I'll give you, this is the example I typically give to explain my new book. If you were to look at some of these iconic and well-known stories about history, global history, World War II history, like, for example, if you looked at the Night of Broken Glass, which is very, very famous, they teach you about this in school. What they taught me in advanced placement history, the only class I was actually good at, was that the German people one day woke up and decided to smash some windows and spray paint some swastikas and all of that. And the same thing's happening today. But then when you read the story, you realize that it's missing context. Well, how could there be any context to people attacking Jewish businesses? Well, there's always a reason for it, whether you agree with it, it's justified or otherwise. There's always a reason for something. People don't just get up one day and do something like that. So you learn that the reason was because a German diplomat was assassinated by a Jewish terrorist. I can give you the names of them. Ernst von Roth is the German diplomat, and Herschel Greenspan is the Jewish terrorist. So he assassinated this German diplomat, and the German people, this was in the late 1930s. By that point, especially, the German people had had enough of it and decided to go out and to break those windows and whatnot. And so if you read that story, even after the fact, it's missing the post context too, because who called for a stop to those riots? It wasn't random people. It was the German government. It was actually Joseph Goebbels who called for an end to those riots and protests. And I believe it's in his diary that Hitler and him both sat down and had a conversation and decided that they got to put an end to this because it's not good. So that's quite literally the opposite of what I was taught in school. And it becomes the opposite when you get the context on both ends, what led to it and who called for an end to it. So things like that. Another example I give is, I read this, I didn't know this. I read this on the My Jewish Learning website. I read this in one of these Jewish encyclopedias online. I read this, I think it was on a history website, just like a standard mainline history website, that the so-called protests in Germany against Jewish businesses, not the breaking of the glass, but the protests where they send out these young Germans to block the entrances to Jewish businesses. It turns out that's not actually really what happened. What really happened was that there were Jewish organizations in the United States that had gathered together in New York and also dozens of other cities and called for boycotts in early and late March of German goods. And Joseph Goebbels, again, I'm not saying I'm a fan of Joseph Goebbels. I'm not really a fan of any historical character, but Joseph Goebbels said, well, if you're going to boycott and protest against our goods, we're already in an economically disastrous situation. That's an economic declaration of warfare. And if you keep doing it, we're going to come after you. And of course, the Jewish Congress, there were some Jews in New York that said that this is not a good idea. It's provocation. We shouldn't do this. But they decided to do it anyway. Massive protests at Madison Square Garden, dozens of cities across the United States. And what that led to was, in April, the Germans had their protest. The German protest was only really technically one day, maybe a week if you're really stretching it out. The Jewish protest was over a month, and it was in dozens and dozens of cities around the United States. So quite literally the opposite of what we were told. The Germans protested just throughout the 30s against Jewish products. I guess you could say that in some maybe technical way, but the official protest that was run by the government was actually done on a single day, and it was done in response to Jewish protests against German goods. See, that context is historically verifiable, and furthermore, I got it from Jewish sources, among other sources. So when you go to the source of these things, you realize that it's not even hidden. It's right there. It's
Mm,
just that if you don't go to the source of where the story comes from, you don't get the context for this or for any story. Obviously, you're left holding the bag, as they say. You're left without a clear indication of why people behaved in a certain way or why certain events happened. And instead, you have this idea painted in your head that it's like some random act of violence. In fact, that's one of the things that I came across so often in the writing the book. It was that there's all these stories we know, all these tropes, but the argument is always, to quote Randy Fine, "It's never our fault." I
mm,
mean, at some point, I mean, there's definitely a fault, whether it's moral or otherwise, like whether there's a basis for it that you can understand or not. There's always a reason why people do things. And as you alluded to, yes, Jewish people can joke about it all they want and they can make implications that you're stupid or something. But Jewish people have been kicked out of over 100 countries, some of them more than once, and the accusations are always the same. Every single time they were the same in Russia, 1700s. They were the same in. I mean, you can name a country: Spain, Lithuania, etc. That they might even be the same in if you read about the history of some of the demons in Japan, or the demons in Colin de Plancy's Dictionary Infernal. They're very, very similar to, they look like rabbis. They're described like rabbis. They hold rabbinical scrolls. That's not an accident. There's a common history here throughout the entire world. Some of it's embedded in mythology, and some of it's not so much embedded in mythology. It's embedded in the history of the country. But yes, those accusations were accurate. They were true. And some of the old propaganda from the 30s, if you look at it, I mean, I'll give you one example. Look at Sydney Sweeney. It's not a debate about whether she's hot or not. It's just an issue of, here's a blonde woman who became very famous from her HBO show, and otherwise you'd look at her and you think she looks like like a 1950s, 1960s typical American blonde movie star kind of a lady, and maybe not that innocent, but in a sense, this innocent blonde girl. And who's her boyfriend? Her boyfriend is a Jewish businessman named Scooter Braun, and approximately, can't say it was exactly at the time, but approximately the time they started dating was the time that she became some big, I don't know how this is possible, but some big conservative symbol of femininity, even though conservatives typically dress conservatively and don't run around with their breasts hanging out and their asses hanging out. So, in other words, you have a Jewish guy in a black suit. He usually wears a black suit. Funny enough, he wears a black suit and he has essentially control, like Britney Spears, essentially control of this blonde woman. And it looks identical, because it is identical to old so-called anti-Semitic posters where there's like a fat Jewish guy in a black suit trying to corrupt this young blonde girl in Germany. Those kinds of images are not tropes. They're literal depictions of what was happening in Germany, in the same way that those folks, we can talk about this later, control much of the porn industry. And in the same way that if you were to look at images of, say, there's a very famous one of a Jewish man behind the Soviet Union, the United States, and Great Britain, the flags, and he's peering from the shadows. I mean, that literally, you can look at pictures of Howard Lutnick and Donald Trump. That literally is what Howard Lutnick does. He peers at Trump through the shadows and clearly controls much of the administration, like a Dick Cheney. So anyway, I wanted to know about those tropes. I wanted to know about blood libel. I wanted to know about the tropes about demons. I wanted to know about the banker trope and the entertainment media trope. I wanted to know, like, where that stuff comes from. That was the motivation for the book. And then I learned a lot more, as I'm describing now, along the way. So I hope that answers your question to start. I don't mean to be so long-winded.
No, no, that was perfect. Yeah, I mean, well, when you're watching history be changed in real time, like we are today, Israel gets us in a war with Iran. No, they didn't. What are you talking about? That was never said. We're watching it happen in real time. So it makes you wonder and look back a little bit, right? And you find that history is not 100% inverted, but there's been a lot of obfuscation with the characters to play, in Germany, etc. Like, for instance, I've been researching a lot into the occult Nazi kind of regime, like the theosophical aspect to the Nazis. And throughout the reading of this, I found out that Moses Hess, who is like the godfather of Zionism, he predicted in the 1800s, the mid 1800s, that out of Germany or Europe, there would be a nationalist movement that would rise up and essentially send them down to Israel and mandatory Palestine. What's interesting about that is right after that, he gets with the Rothschilds and he starts to see the development of course, the Balfour Declaration later, but also the mythologies get created. And by that, I mean, like, you've got the guy who made the Astara magazine, who was under, I'm going to forget his name, Guido von List. Guido von List created Arianism. So this whole taking the theosophical idea of a root race and implanting this idea that there's like this one divine kind of root race, right? And that's where this idea kind of came from the Nazis, where they tell you about how they want the Aryan race to run the world. Well, that aspect never went anywhere, which is why I think the Sydney Sweeney thing and everything else is kind of revamping. Because when you look at people like Epstein, and the DNA studies he was doing, I think this is like what we're told the Nazis were trying to do. I do think they are doing, the elites, which is trying to isolate some sort of DNA because it goes back to some kind of God, king, divine line of whatever that they believe they're a part of. Whether it's Nephilim, some people think it's Nephilim. But this is why the kings all were very incestuous, to keep their bloodline pure. And over time, of course, that's been muddied. And now I think that this is kind of almost a thing to get us to sign off for a hierarchical structured system because of the root race concept of like pure divine lines of races, which eventually will be brought back through this anti-Zionist kind of anti-Jew resurgence that's coming up now, that's going to be utilized against us, I believe, is going on currently. I don't know what you think about that. It's kind of a weird theory, but I think that it's kind of the same thing rebranded.
I can't speak to every aspect of what you're saying, but I can speak to the general theme of what you're saying because I generally agree with it. I think that you're right. And I think that in terms of the genetics, whether or not you or your audience or me or my audience think or understand those things or believe in them or whatever, the fact is that if you read some of the Department of Justice files that were released on Jeffrey Epstein, we still don't have all of them. But if you read some of them, there are references in those files to things. You can email me. I can get you the exact copy if you're curious, rdgable1991@gmail.com. I have some of them in my book. There are references, definitely references to genetics and how genetics should be the determining factor in how people are hired, and that those genetics should be Jewish genetics. I would go a step further and I would say, sure, Germans, Japanese, Russians, you name it, all Americans, British, all did all sorts of experiments, did things that were immoral, did things that were, for one reason or another, I guess, or by one definition or another, illegal, especially during times of war. But ultimately, I think many of the things that the Germans were accused of, they did not do. And I think that many of the things the Germans were accused of are projections of what the Jews were doing. And that is embedded within what you just said, because the idea of the master race is embodied today by the Israelis, by the Zionists, and by Jews in general. And if we are to believe that, okay, this idea of the master race was a German idea, and it was an idea that was stomped out historically, it ended with the end of the war, we defeated such an evil. Well, apparently not, because it very much exists in the world today, and it exists in a sense, in a way that's far more naked than it was in any historical sense, because you've got mainline rabbis that talk about these things and make open statements about them. And yes, of course, the writings of Adolf Hitler, the writings of top German leaders, of course, the German people even believed in a sense of self-determination, but they also believed in a sense of self-determination and superiority, if you will, for the Japanese. In fact, while the Germans had an alliance with the Japanese, it was Washington, D.C., it was the U.S. military that saw the Japanese as inferior. The U.S. military called them parasites, insects. I believe the naval publications referred to them as an infestation, as a lice. That's why they dropped experimental incendiary devices on Tokyo, one of the worst bombings in the history of the world, outside Dresden. That's why we dropped 2 experimental weapons, whatever they were, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because they saw the Japanese as inferior, insignificant insects that needed to be exterminated. The Germans didn't, on average anyway. I mean, the American public might not have, but the American government surely did. So that alone conflicts with the narrative that the Germans believe in pure superiority. If you ask that question to historians, they'll say, well, that was because the Germans were hypocrites. I think that they were probably the most rational, logical people in the world, considering that they won all the Nobel Prizes. I mean, they won 3 times as many Nobel Prizes as Americans did. I think they won almost double what the British had won. Nobody could compete with the Germans, which is another projection, because the Jews today tell us they're the smartest, they're the most intelligent, they invented everything, they developed everything, they're the leaders in technology, which in some ways that is true, but it's also only true because they have a monopoly on those things, because they have a monopoly on the financial sector, so they can fund all the startup groups, which is where a lot of the AI stuff comes from in Israel.
Yeah, but
So
Ryan, I thought we wouldn't have America without Judaism.
that's what they tell us, right?
Yeah,
Maybe we should just start believing the opposite of what we're told. Maybe
that's
we
right.
would have a better America if it wasn't for Judaism. Maybe they're the master race. At least that's what they tell us. They're the ones that believe in that superiority, that they're chosen by God, right? I mean, yes, all those types of things, those projections can actually be found not just philosophically, or you can just kind of argue them because it's what it sounds like. You can find them historically in the record. Like many of the things the Germans were literally things that are physical that are documented that you accuse the Germans of historically, like the Kettenforst Forest massacre, for example. That's not debated anymore. That was a massacre that was not carried out by the Germans. It was carried out by the Soviets. Lots of massacres were carried out by the Soviets and blamed on the Germans.
Yeah, that one was wild. I remember when I had never heard of that, and when I looked into it more, I was like, "Holy shit!" And that was gruesome. That is a gruesome
Yes,
story. Didn't they like
yes,
nail
it
people to
is.
doors or something?
This is the one where they killed like 22,000 Poles. I think there's a direct order from Joseph Stalin to do it, whereas there's no direct order for any kind of extermination like that from Adolf Hitler. They just say it was all done in code. The
Mm,
one that you're thinking of is, if I pronounce it correctly, I think it's pronounced Nemmersdorf or Nemmersdorf.
yeah.
That's the one where they literally, the Soviets crucified people to barn doors. I mean,
It's
there's
crazy.
photographs of them. There's people's skin. They would peel people's skin off. I don't think it was at that massacre, but if you read any story about Soviet atrocities, it's like Hellraiser stuff. I mean,
Mhm.
they would rip out people's intestines, especially Christians. That's why they nailed people to doors or barn doors or something
And
like
they
that.
built a Tower of Babel. So it's like, what is that? You know what I mean? When you start to kind of converge all this ancient Babylonian kind of mystery cults that have kind of progressed through time, you have the Babylonian Talmud, which seems to be the main sect that this group hides behind, right? Because I don't think that they're isolated just behind Jews, but I will say all of them,
They're not.
not
No.
all of them are Jews, but all the ones that are Jewish, they're, or how should I say this? You get what I'm saying. Like, not all of them are Jews. Well, all of them are Jews, but not everybody that's Jewish is them. That's kind of where I'm getting at with that. Where it's like you still will find that all of them are kind of the pro-Zionist, kind of Sabbatean style Judaism. But anyway, point being, isn't that crazy? Like, they don't even teach us about any of the Soviet stuff, only the Nazis.
Almost none of it, except that the Soviets were the good guys because they marched into Berlin and raped a bunch of German women and murdered a bunch of people indiscriminately, and then forced 14 million Germans to flee their homes and took over their homes like they do in Gaza. That's the
Mhm.
largest displacement of people in the history of the world officially, is the flight and expulsion of the Germans, 14 million of them.
Wow.
If you want to learn more about that, people say, where do you get that information from? It's like, well, I don't know why that's such an important question, because people, first of all, usually don't ask that about anything else. But if you want to know where I get the information from, one of the sources is a Russian journalist who wrote a book that you can, by the way, get online for free because it's not copyrighted anymore. It's called The Red Terror in Russia by Sergei Petrovich Melagunov, I believe is how you pronounce his name. I don't speak Russian, but Sergei Petrovich will find you The Red Terror in Russia. And if you read it, he's got photographs in it too. It's this relatively short book. He's a journalist and he was documenting the crimes, and it wasn't hearsay. It wasn't things that it was done in code words, and it was documented, 50 years after the incident, and they pay people to say certain things. No, it was documented. I think he wrote that at the end or in the middle of the Red Terror. They have photographs of what they were doing to people. So that's one place. I'm not sure if we're referring to the same thing, but because you said that they built like their own Tower of Babel, I'm under the impression they never built that. But they did have a plan to build what they called the Palace of the Soviets, and it's not a debatable thing. If you have two eyeballs and they work, it is identical to probably several, but at least Athanasius Kosher, his depiction of the Tower of Babel, which, I mean, it's identical. That basically it's the Tower of Babel. You're right. I don't
So
know if
did they not finish it? They had Lenin on top of it, right? They never finished that?
Yeah, I don't believe they finished it, but as far as history goes, who the hell knows? All I know is that
Right.
they did build the foundation for it.
Mhm.
I read that it was never completed. I don't know to what extent they mean completed.
The
There's that.
plan was there nonetheless, right? And then, of
Yes,
course,
the plan was done, yes.
it's not a coincidence that Klaus Schwab has a bust of Lenin in his office while he's talking about various things, right? So we see how, because the Illuminati, quote unquote, it's always been their plan to eliminate property and to eliminate, obviously all the things the WEF kind of championed. You own nothing and be happy.
They call that Nazism too. Klaus Schwab's a Nazi because he has an accent.
Right. No, it's all Bolshevik, every bit of it. Even the Operation Trust 2.0,
Oh, yeah.
QAnon, right? So, and that's that was the first episode I did where I was like, that's exactly what this is. Like, it's all Bolshevik shit. And so I got deeper into learning about that because clearly that is an area that we need to understand. And one crazy thing about Stalin that I remember reading is he had like a chicken that he had defeathered, and he would, cut it. It had thousands of cuts on it. And, it would still follow him around because he would drop little kernels of corn here and there. And he pointed to the guy, or pointed to the chicken talking to this guy. He was like, this is how you treat people. And you keep them just kind of strung along, just on a little kernel at a time, beaten down and broken. And that is kind of like, if you look at the totalitarian COVID, handing out stipend checks here and there, that was a little taste of like what that could be and what that might be in the future.
You're right, yeah. And
Yeah.
meanwhile, Hitler was a vegetarian.
Right.
So that's another projection. And by the way, I don't know if I assume that you do know this. The place that was destroyed to make way for that Tower of Babel that they were building was you remember what it was? The cathedral.
Yeah.
Cathedral of Christ the Savior. They literally blew up a cathedral to build this Tower of Babel looking structure called the Palace of the Soviets.
Yep.
That's all mainline history. You just have to read books that have a little dust on them.
That's
And
right.
it's not even hidden
For
because
now, Anthropic's cutting those up and
for now.
scanning them and changing them. I'm sure you saw that.
I did see that. Yes, I did see that, and I also saw that Anthropic's Jewish CEO is married to a woman. I don't believe she's Jewish. She might be Jewish. Doesn't really matter, honestly. But her background is dating the founder of Google. I believe one of the founders of Google, or one of the people from Google, which is not like a big deal. But when I looked more into her, I found, as is recently reported the last week in the news, that his wife, this is the guy that founded, or he runs Anthropic, Dario Amodei. His wife is Cami Clark, who, it has been revealed in the Epstein files, had courted Jeffrey Epstein, Jewish Mossad, I believe, to
Wow.
invest further in her and in their Jewish porn company. It's a luxury porn company, but yet they somehow still try to blame pornography on anybody and everybody. It's like, oh, it's the Democrats, or it's this group of people, or it's the Muslims.
How do you have luxury porn?
I don't know, but they wanted to. Maybe it's shot in super high def, and
Yeah, like what does that even mean?
I guess it's not Al Goldstein porn. Al Goldstein porn was the hardcore stuff that
Yeah.
truly degraded people. That was disgusting. That wasn't just nudity and typical sex.
I think
So
luxury porn, I think like human hunting, you know what I mean? It's like next level, when because these people, when you think luxury, you think like these elites, they're into not even sex. It's
yeah,
it's shit masochistic, the way that they operate.
That's actually a good point. I didn't think of that, because when I think of luxury, I think funny thing is, last night my wife got a bottle of carbonated water. We were going to make some lemon water, kind of like a homemade soda.
Mm.
And I said, there's a brand over here in Japan that I like because it actually does have a better taste. It's just water and carbonation, but whatever they do, it tastes better. So I said, can you get that brand? I said, it was like another 20 yen, which is, I don't know, a penny. I said, can you get that brand? I said, let's have a luxurious dinner. So to me, a luxurious dinner was spending 20 yen on a bottle of carbonated water. So yeah, to them, luxury means, hunting people in the woods, probably.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Big difference. Simple man. Yeah, definitely. Wow. So let's go through some of the themes throughout your book. We've covered kind of the Germany, a little bit of the Japan. Go through some of the themes that you think are pertinent in your book that people would kind of grab people, to be like, oh, I didn't know that, and I'm sure you've got many instances of that.
Well, the main one that I shared on a couple of shows that I've done so far about the book, and one of the ones that shocked me, quite honestly, even though I was always open to learning new things, was the book burnings, and learning that it was actually the German students that were doing the book burnings, that, like the protests, like the vandalizing, it was never organized directly, or it was never organized organically, let's say, by the German leadership. It was a byproduct of assassination, or it was the byproduct of Jewish protests, etc. Well, this is kind of a similar thing. It wasn't the German government, it was the German students that got together, kind of like you see today. There's a lot of really young people that are really angry, and they're doing things that both sides of the political spectrum are not sanctioning. So the German students burned books. And what it shocked me, because I've used that trope myself. It's like a digital book burning, or it's like a book burning. They're getting rid of history, because that's taken on a life of its own today, its own definition. But it all goes back to what the quote Germans did. And so if you look at that story, you can physically look at it, because there are pictures of the book burnings. In fact, one of the most famous ones with this bonfire, and you can see German students in their uniforms throwing books into the fire. That looks bad. And then when you look closer, you can see that some of the books that are piled up in most of the photos, if they're close enough, are porn. It's nudity, it's naked women, it's transgender material. And it turns out a significant portion of what was burned, which, by the way, wasn't like an every night thing for decades. It was more like a single night, although there were a couple of them where things were burned in different cities, primarily Berlin, which was the famous one. And if you look at those images, it was pornography, and it was transgender material. And most of it was coming from Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute of Sexual Science.
Yeah, they keep this one off Google, that's for sure.
Yep, there's the picture there at the top of your screen. Don't scroll. That one right there, your mouse to the right of your mouse, that one there. So this is the one where there's some, quote,
oh yeah,
Nazi officials that are standing on a pile of books, and you can clearly see the nudity. You can clearly see the pornography, magazines, flyers, pamphlets, books. And there's actually one photograph. It's probably somewhat hard to find, but you might be able to dig it up. It's of Magnus Hirschfeld and his bust, his little sculpture, being stripped out of the institute. I'll tell you about him in a moment, but stripped out of the institute and carried to a fire. For those of you who don't know Magnus Hirschfeld was a sexologist. That's using the word very lightly and loosely. He was a German Jewish sexologist, and Magnus Hirschfeld was a guy who was essentially and is essentially the founder of transgenderism.
Mm-hmm.
His institute, and these are graphic photographs that I found in the Berlin archive, the State Archive of Berlin. You can probably find them by a simple internet search. You could type in the wall. I believe it was referred to as the wall of transition. It's really graphic stuff. They had something called the wall of transition, where they showed the transition surgeries that were performed by the institute, which sounds like something from It's like Fallout 4, the institute.
Mm-hmm.
They had these images where they proudly displayed the gender transitions that they put people through. And it is considered, on one hand, if you read like Scientific American, or if you watch the El Dorado documentary, which I would highly recommend because it's a ridiculous documentary. I think it's on Netflix, other platforms too. So if you watch that, though, it they brag about how Magnus Hirschfeld and about how Jews in particular were the creators of the transgender movement in the 1920s, or at least the early 20th century, homosexuality, etc., which was rampant in Berlin, etc. There's, where they first heard about that in the mainstream actually was watching Arrested Development, where one of the characters went into, I forget the exact context. I think they went into their grandma's penthouse, and there was all these like sex toys everywhere, and she walks in and says, "This is like Weimar Germany." I didn't really know what that meant at the time. And then I researched. I was like, "Oh my god, that's what they meant." I can't believe that was in a mainline TV show. It was just perversion. It was sex. It was homosexuality. It was transgenderism. It was the modern LGBTQ, and it was pushed by, and historically, Magnus Hirschfeld is credited with essentially founding that movement with the other people that worked with him. So that's what the Germans were actually burning. And so it's funny today when you have, as an example, this is how I imagine it. You have like your conservatives, or people that are supposedly conservative, like the woman that runs Libs of TikTok, who's actually a Jew pretending to be a Christian. That's not my opinion. That's Jewish newspapers. And she, not only did she get the Epstein files, but she posts stuff all the time on X, never gets censored, never gets banned because she's part of the system. She posts things about how parents are going to school board meetings and reading these books on transgenderism that are basically pornography and getting kicked out. And she's like, we got to stop these Democrat libs from doing this kind of stuff. This is what conservative values. It's like, your people created that, first of all. Yeah, you can't blame all Jews, but that's not what I'm doing. When I say her people, I mean, it's the mainline pushers of pornography and LGBTQ today are Israel, not Muslims. Muslims supposedly throw these people off buildings. Tel Aviv is the gay capital of the world. Prior to Tel Aviv becoming the gay capital of the world, which is not my opinion, it's in their newspapers, and it's in their travel websites, like come to Tel Aviv. It's the gayest place in the world. It's in their newspapers. It's in their travel
It's so
websites.
interesting. You just get this false dichotomy where, like earlier, you were saying how there are leftist groups that are majorly Jewish ran, that are anti-Israel, etc. Yet they're pushing everything that the smut that they were pushing that made the Nazis, rise. So it's interesting because no matter what, you get the same bullshit, whether it's the warmongering ethno supremacist, or if it's the progressive to the point of deprivation and degradation.
Yeah, well, there was a painter who wrote a book about that, and he described that in the first part of the book about how they play both sides because they have the money to play both sides. They victimize themselves for two reasons. One, because they don't even care about their own people on average. You see what Israel does today to their own people. They don't care about them. They'll throw them under the bus, as they say, or they'll blow up the bus with Jews on it to justify more Israeli power, to justify more censorship. But secondhand, they do that because it victimizes themselves, and then they can claim, that they need to censor things and take more control of things. Yeah. But it is wild, to your question and to my response, that things like LGBTQ, transgenderism, etc., can be pushed by mainline Israelis today as something like with Magnus Hirschfeld to be proud of. Like, we invented this, we're a world leader in this. The Muslims don't like it, but the Muslims are also behind it. The Ayatollah's gay. I mean, that's all. That's that insulting, like, oh, the Germans were hypocrites, so they believed in the master race. Ha 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 ha. Meanwhile, they believe that God chose them to rule the world. So
yeah, and Trump has the correspondence dinners promoted by or sponsored by Grindr, while he's passing executive orders to defund transgender surgeries for children. Which, by the way, if you look into it, that's not even true. It still can happen. It still goes on. So it's this weird placation to act like he's actually on the side that he isn't. And again, it shows this false dialectical system because he's on the right working with the Shabbat Lubavitch right-wing Jews. So you would think that he would be against it, but he's not, because it's a false dialectic.
To go back to your question about what I wanted to discuss in the book, this is a wonderful thing to discuss in the book. It's also a disturbing and gross thing to discuss in the book. But yes, Grindr, Bumble, Tinder, most of the dating apps or hookup apps, all funded by, all created by Jews. And there's a really funny story, I think it's pretty funny, about the founding of Bumble and Tinder. And you can read this in Jewish newspapers. I read this in the Jewish Forward. You could look up the article, Bumble versus Tinder, What's Jewish About the Epic Dating Site War? And you find out that the people that run these companies, Whitney Hurd, for example, or Wolf Hurd, I think is maybe her first name, Wolf Hurd, and Justin Mateen, not only are they both Jewish, but they also had their own little sexual relationship. And then they create these companies, and then they basically steal from each other. So this is a great example, actually, of the last point that we just made, is that you have these two Jewish people, proudly Jewish, in Jewish newspapers. They're leading the charge to help young people date and have, relationships, like Rabbi Shmuley with his kosher sex and his dildos with his daughter. And you have these two Jews that literally are having sex with each other. They're in a relationship, not any of my business, but then they take it to the business world, and then they steal from each other. Like, these are people that are supposed to be on the same side, and they're like the character Watto in Star Wars. They're greedy, they're slobs, they steal from each other, they've got slaves, they don't care.
No honor amongst thieves. I mean, Stalin killed plenty.
No.
Yeah, Stalin killed plenty of Jews whenever he took over, didn't he?
He did, yes.
Yeah. So in Tex Mars, he's dead now, but he was great. He was a pastor that was calling out Zionism before it was a thing, and he was pointing out the fact that the Soviets were like 70% Jewish, and people just can't believe that because they did kill Jewish double agents, etc. But he was pointing out that there's a cosmopolitan Jew and there's the Zionist Jew. And Stalin was a cosmopolitan Jew, which meant I want to run my country and be a Zionist leader in my country here, right? But the Zionist ones were like, no, we're going to run the world from Israel. And so he had a problem with those people because he wanted to have his own power, right? Yet he did help Israel get created. He helped lobby for it. I mean, he's a big player in getting that to happen. So it's a weird thing that people kind of can't understand, because they're like, well, he helped Israel be created. So how is he no honor amongst thieves? That's the best answer you could give to something like that.
So did Hitler. Hitler assisted. In fact,
Yeah,
Hitler
of course.
probably assisted far more than Stalin did.
The Havar Agreement, yeah.
That was in the early 1930s. Yeah, the Havar Agreement, which is very mainline history, along with the assistance that, the funny thing is, the Israelis actually went to say that they're Israelis. I guess they weren't Israelis at the time, but the Zionists actually went to the German leadership, and they asked them to help, and they went to the British too. I mean, they were already doing it, but they basically asked them to help exterminate some of the local population. Mm-hmm. And the German government said, you people are insane. You are crazy. Not going to happen. So yes, after they sent them, mutually beneficial, after they had sent them to Palestine, mandatory Palestine, they went back to the Germans and said, can you help us exterminate some of these local people here these are just parasites. We got to destroy. They're sucking off all the wealth and resources from the land, and that's our land. And the Germans said, there's physical documentation of that. There's a document, communication between the Jewish terrorist groups, which is what they were, and the German leadership. And the Germans said, no, we're not going to help you do that. I mean, that kind of thing should be in every history book. Yep. Because at the very least, it completely destroys it destroys a lot of narratives, but it also shows you that for people that like to make accusations such as, oh, you're just a Nazi. Well, quite frankly, F them too, or fuck them too, because those Nazis, so-called, which they're not really Nazis, but those Nazis, so-called, are the ones that help to, I guess maybe not as much as it might appear, because they did refuse to help them commit ethnic cleansing and genocide in one document, but they assisted in helping them set up the state, which is also part of, I think most of that's obscured, considering that we're told that the Germans wanted to execute all the Jews. And yet if you read the official Holocaust Memorial Yad Vashem website and the minutes from the Wannsee Conference, where the so-called final solution was actually discussed in 1942 in January, it literally makes no mention of extermination. So they have to go to the argument that it was all code words, but it does actually give you an explicit list of the plans for the final solution. The explicit list of plans were deportation, immigration with an E, and creating this is the issue that, frankly, I have with people saying I'm a quote Nazi, is that no, F them too, because if you read the Wannsee Conference minutes, they literally said that they were going to set up a new Jewish seed. They used the word seed. let a new Jewish seed blossom and bloom. Well, that's kind of it's hard to imagine that people that thought that the Jews were the central problem in all issues wanted to help the Jews also establish themselves in another place and help them to grow and become powerful. That doesn't fit with the narrative, and yet that's actually in the historical record. It's actually in the Yad Vashem website, their archive for the Wannsee Conference, and yet there is no record of like mass extermination orders. There's mass deportation orders. The only thing they can do is call that a code word and say Hitler issued his orders in secret codes, and they never but then they also documented everything else. So none of it's kosher. None of it makes any sense whatsoever. And just to touch on the thing that you said about Stalin, to clarify, Stalin was not Jewish, but in the sense of being a cosmopolitan Jew, like people joke and say that I'm Jewish, or I joke and say that I'm Jewish because, I like getting a good deal. I like a discount. I'm pretty cheap. I like talking to customer service. Sometimes I'm not coordinated. So people joke and say I'm Jewish. So just because, someone says that, I know there's people listening that'll say, you're wrong, he wasn't Jewish. Well, yeah, but then again, there's also people that say that a lot of the other leadership of the Soviet Union weren't Jewish, but then it turns out they actually were Jewish. And there's actually,
I think he was like married or had some kind of familial connection with Judaism, but I don't exactly remember the whole detail. I'd have to look into it again. It's been a while, but yeah, he's not in particularly Jewish. I did say that. But the whole Soviet regime,
the cosmopolitan Jew.
Yeah, and in the Soviet unit at that time was operating as a unit, and it was majorly Jewish, working on Jewish, points. Now, a little bit of conjecture here, but when we go back to the beginning of the show with Moses Hess and the prediction of Europe and what could happen, and then you look at the Wannsee Conference and the plan to do exactly what he predicted would happen, and it was funded and closely worked with the Rothschilds, who he worked with when he came up with this. So you see this direct correlation here. It seems that the only thing that's different, though, is that somewhere along the line, the plan changed. And they said, well, hold on. If we're going to make a new seed, we need a sacrifice. You can't have life without death, right? You got to sacrifice to get something. We can't create a whole country and try to run the world out of it unless we make a major sacrifice first. And that's what I believe that what Holocaust was, intended for. What do you think about that? Do you think maybe it's conjecture, but what do you think about that as far as general line of thinking in hindsight?
Well, okay, so this is something that I never, first of all, intended to discuss in the new book. I never intended to discuss anything about the so-called Holocaust. I say so-called because Holocaust is mass death by fire. That is not what happened to even the handful of Jews who did die, hundreds of thousands, or 271 through the Red Cross, or even a few million, if you want to argue that. They were killed largely, admittedly, this is not my opinion. You can go to jail for this in Germany, and yet the Holocaust Encyclopedia acknowledges that most of the Jews that did die, most of the people that died from the forced long marches between facilities, immigration camps, etc. They died from starvation. They died from exposure. They died from things that had gunshots that had nothing to do with mass fire, being burned alive. That is, however, what happened to Tokyo, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki, some of the worst atrocities in the history of the world. So the Japanese actually were victims of several Holocausts. The Jews were not victims of a Holocaust during World War II by definition. Now, in terms
did the seizing of Germany have anything to do with the starvation in the camps? Just curious, because I've always wondered.
It absolutely did.
That's
yes,
what I thought, yeah.
Just the bombings of the supply lines and the cutting off of those lines to the camps is what produced many of the conditions that were photographed, and the legitimate ones that were photographed. Others were fake because they literally, we learned this from what's her name, Ava Schlaus, who's related to the girl that wrote the diary, I believe. But she was liberated, and she said that they never, in Auschwitz.
The Anne Frank, like the sister, she said it never happened. It was like fake, or like it didn't happen how she said.
Yes, I forget what her relationship is. I think she's really maybe like a cousin. I don't know. Maybe
my memory says sister, but I could be totally wrong. I usually just spout whatever I think I remember, and people check me later on the fine details.
That story, that's not even an opinion. I think she's a stepsister. That's not even an opinion. Like, she was on American television, national television, saying that because when they liberated the camp, it was the middle of January. It was the winter, and the photographs really don't have any snow. And she said that she even went to the Soviet Union and asked them, and she said, like, they just acknowledged, like, yeah, we sent camera crews and photographers there to stage the liberation because we didn't send people there initially when it
Right.
was liberated. So they literally created a fake scene and photo.
Yeah.
And who traditionally, like the Mossad agent on 60 Minutes, we create a pretend world. We are the
Mhm.
directors, the writers, producers, etc. I mean, that's literally what it is. Plus, they ran I forget the camp, but they ran a disinfo psych war campaign out of one of the so-called concentration camps
Mm.
that was run by Jews and the U.S. government. And furthermore, so there's a lot to this dissect here. First of all, a concentration camp, if anybody invented it, the British probably invented it, but it really wasn't like a singular invention. It's just a camp where a lot of people are concentrated.
Yeah.
Oh, that's reducing no, it's not reduce. That's the definition of what it
Well,
is.
we had them too. So with American citizens in them.
We put
So
Japanese and Italians into them.
yeah, they
Yes,
were
we did.
Japanese, but they were citizens,
American
legals.
Japanese,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
We put them into camp. Well, those weren't as bad. Okay, well, that's not the point. The point is
Yeah.
concentration camps are not a unique thing to Germany. There actually weren't as many concentration camps as there were gulags. You can
Right.
find old maps of the gulag system, which, by the way, the first gulag was at a monastery, and they enslaved and made them work hard labor, the people at the monastery, so religious officials, just like they blew up the Cathedral of Christ and wanted to build their Tower of Babel. That's a little piece of interesting history for the Gulag system. Anyway, though, yes, the concentration camp system, if you read the report from the Polish government that was published in the 40s about those camps, it explicitly says, that Auschwitz, not only were there 44 subcamps of Auschwitz, which was why there were death tolls that were far higher from disease, starvation, exposure, etc., but Auschwitz was not listed as an extermination camp. It was listed as a concentration camp and a labor facility, which is what it was. They
Mm.
had nurseries at Auschwitz. They had fencing. They had music.
Dentists.
They had dentists at Auschwitz. You're right.
Didn't they have
There's
like a
photographs.
choir or something? They were able to like play music. I mean, this is crazy. Like when
Yeah,
I
they had
tell
a
people,
choir.
dude, the visceral reaction people have when you mention something like this, you got to do it in like small baby doses,
Oh
Like, hey,
yeah.
did you know
Oh
that
yeah.
they were able to bring instruments into their camps and play like choirs? Dude, people look at you like you just fucking shit an egg or something. They're like, what? It's crazy.
One of the women who was in, she died a couple of years ago. I think it was 2019. One of the women that was actually in one of those orchestras or something. I think it was an orchestra.
Yeah, yeah.
Someone had asked her about that. They said, "So you played instruments at Auschwitz?" Yeah, we played instruments at Auschwitz. And then they asked her some questions, and she's like, "Well, what happened was they bring in the Jews on the trains, and we had to play the music as they bring the Jews in. Very sad music."
Oh,
It's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
well, it's like, hold on a second. Just that story alone doesn't make any sense because just that little detail, because they played inside. Trains were outside. Trains weren't
Oh,
anywhere near the orchestra. The orchestra was inside a music hall where people sit down and watch the music. So even that's a
I'm so
lie.
glad you said that
Yeah,
because when you do look that up, that's the first thing it says. Well, no, it was sad music. Like they were just out there playing.
little tiny
Yeah,
violin.
yeah, there it is. Yeah, tiny violins. Now, here's my thing. When we look at this, and this is what I want to get to, because I know that you will understand this because you're kind of the guy who called this out months ago. I don't think the Mossad, I've been saying this a lot lately. The Mossad didn't forget how to wage war by deception. We know about Israel because they want us to know about Israel because the reaction is beneficial towards a solution that they want to give us, whether it's a AI police state ran by surveillance through anti-Semitic laws, etc. Well, you pointed out that another aspect of that is they want a resurgence in the Hollywood version of Nazism, right? So it's not even a resurgence, but a creation of this like Nazi kind of movement. And what I've noticed is that you've got a lot of people, influencers online. She's got this chick has like a black sun necklace. I wish I could find which one it is, but every one of her posts are all like Nazi style kind of rhetoric posts. So this gradual, natural evolution of the anti-Zionist movement is becoming this JQ movement, which is kind of another aspect to this on X. I don't know if you've seen some of the stuff on there, but point is, it's exactly what you called out months ago, and that's that they do want a real kind of thing, like them to kick them out. You go ahead and
Oh,
elaborate.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to take words out of your mouth.
Yeah, so, okay, so there's a lot to discuss here. First of
Yeah.
all, there's a few things that I missed in the conversation we've been having. I had mentioned other Soviet officials being Jewish. Lenin, for example, it's always we've been told he's not Jewish. Lenin actually is Jewish. Look up Moscow Times, Lenin's
Yeah.
Jewish lineage. The other thing is we need to still discuss the 6 million Holocaust issue in regard to your question. And then, of course, we need to also define what a Nazi is, because
Yes.
I was always under the impression that Nazi meant like National Socialist, but Nazi was actually a derogatory term that was exploited by Jews. It was invented by a Jewish writer named Conrad Hayden. And what it was invented for, in the sense that it was used for this purpose, it was invented. It was used to demean the German leadership, to imply that they were like ignorant peasants, or our term in America would be like hillbillies or rednecks, because the term Nazi has a relationship with that word. I think it's Ignaz in German. So it's like country bumpkin. So one, it was a demeaning term, like these are just idiots, they don't know what they're doing. And it was in retaliation for the Germans using the term Sozi, S-O-Z-I, which was an abbreviation for the Social Democratic Party, which was largely comprised of Jews. So even calling them Nazis is a Jewish slur. And that's why I've tried to not use that term anymore, but just pointing that out for listeners so that we have some context there. In terms of getting kicked out, I mean, I'm watching like Australia, the UK, even Germany today, the United States. You're watching all these stories of their swastikas being painted, or the Jews don't feel safe in the UK, etc. But first of all, where exactly do Jews feel safe? Because historically, Jews claim that they've never been safe, even under conditions in which they had disproportionate control of a country, like in the United States. I mean, I thought Jews were some of the most successful, wealthy, intelligent people in the country. Suddenly, they don't feel safe. How can you not feel safe when you basically run Congress? You basically run local police departments. You basically run the media. You basically run the entire financial system. How do you not feel safe? And it's like, that's a logical question, but it's also a question that you can't logically ask realistically, because you have to understand it's not just Jews, it's people that are raised in environments in which they're abused or they're traumatized. And I think most Jews are raised in environments where they're traumatized and they're abused by their own community. They're
That's right.
taught that you are chosen by God. God chose you to rule the world. Anything that people have to say about what you do, whether you do something bad or good, they're just jealous of you. Like that Jewish lawyer recently who was on video saying that it's one life of a Jew is worth 10 million or something. There's a million or 10 million Palestinian lives. And the woman said that's racist. And he said, it is racist, but that is fact. And you are jealous of this. So the
But
only
this
other,
is what happens when you teach people that always they've been shoved into caves and had to live there with no leavening for their bread, so that's how they get matzah. Like every story, every, like, their food comes from being persecuted, stuck in caves. And this is how we came up with this cracker bread, because we couldn't have yeast to raise the bread while we were stuck in this cave about to be killed by these people over and over. That's all they teach them are these stories. So I don't know if you've ever had somebody try to kill you before, but I've had somebody where I'm almost
yes,
99. I've had an odd situation with somebody where I know for a fact they were trying to kill me. Just, it is what it is. I worked with them. It was a weird situation. Point being, what happens to your brain when you think somebody is after you? When you're looking over your shoulder all the time, which is what they've engineered into the minds of most Jewish people through their culture. Like you said, they're being abused and traumatized by their own people. And one of the major ways they do that, besides ethno supremacy, is the idea that everybody wants to kill you. And so also creating this anti-Semitism on purpose to kind of justify that paranoia and fear, it's utilized towards this end goal that they want, which just proves their fears. But what happens, what I was going to get at, what happens whenever you think somebody's going to kill you? You go into this mode where you're like, I'm going to have to get them first. And that's where these people are. They want to get us first because all of us are murderous Jew haters, even though it's not true, right? So the perception of that is the same thing as it really happening. That's all. I just want to add that to there because I think that's very important.
I don't know the context of having someone wanting to kill you. I've had threats, but I do understand psychologically that what you're saying actually makes
Right.
a lot of sense, because that is quite literally the argument that the Israeli leadership uses. Well, yeah, they might not be attacking us now, but we might as well kill them because they're going
Yes.
to want to attack us. I mean, that's
Yes.
literally coming out of the mouths of Israeli leadership. So yes, that's a good point.
That's right.
And to the stories that we hear in the news, the stories that we see from like Stop Anti-Semitism and these other movements and groups, all of these reports are incredibly vague. First of all, the ones that are very explicit, like there was one story, for example, I think it was in the UK. This, I mean, if you just read the details of the story, the whole narrative falls apart. The headline is, arsonists try to burn down synagogue. Okay, I was like, oh my God, they tried to burn down. Okay, well, let's see what the article actually says. This is a big international story. If you read the article, it's so ridiculous. You read the article and it says the building that was almost burned down used to be a synagogue. So it's not even a synagogue anymore. It was a building that was decommissioned. It was bought. But funny thing is, it was bought and it's owned by Muslims.
Yeah.
Muslims actually own the building now. So wouldn't that be a hate crime against Muslims that own it, not against the fact that it used to be a Jewish holy center?
Right.
I mean, so what does that mean? Like literally like if Jews used to live in your apartment or your house, and you rent the apartment, or you buy the house after them, and then you burn the house down accidentally or on purpose for whatever reason, maybe you're trying to collect insurance, that's an act of anti-Semitism because Jews used to live there. I mean, that's how baseless these stories are. And as a matter of fact, back to the 6 million question, or back to the Holocaust question, I didn't know this until about 3 or 4 years ago. I had read about it, but didn't fully understand it. And then when I wrote this new book, I went to the Yad Vashem website and started reading the actual documentation. Like, rhetorically speaking, do you know how they collect those numbers to determine if there's 6 million or 5 million? First of all, you can go to jail in Germany for saying it wasn't 6 million. Yet the Yad Vashem website says as of 2025, 2026, they've only found 5 million. So that's the first issue. The second issue is when you read the Yad Vashem statement of they only found 5 million, they are doing it with artificial intelligence, first of all. Second of all, as a second of all, within the second point, is that if you actually read through how they determine that with or without AI, they determine it with what is called a page of testimony. A page of testimony is, here's an example. You and I are friends, or maybe we're brothers, and for some reason, could have been war, could have been the internet was out, could have been we're both busy. We haven't talked on the phone for a couple of weeks. That can be put down on a piece of paper and classified as, oh, they must have killed Andrew. They must have killed Ryan. They must have been slaughtered. I'm not exaggerating. That literally is how they determine if someone was a victim of the Holocaust. Plus, this is the best part, I think. If there is a best part, the pages of testimony, I don't think all of them, but some of the main ones that they have on the Yad Vashem website that you can actually read, like historical documents, if you translate the Hebrew, they will say that the number of people, like the number of, or how do I word this? If you translate the Hebrew on the document, it explicitly says, and this feeds into the number of people that supposedly died, people that were inconvenienced by what the Germans did. So in other words, if you had a business and your business was, whether it was legal or illegal, whatever, your business lost business because of what the Germans did. Okay. Even if it was just a single protest day, that's considered one of the 6 million. You didn't have to die. You could have been in New York City in 1934, 1935. And that is classified as one of the 6 million deaths, or it can be classified as one of the 6 million deaths. That's in their pages of testimony.
Well, we know who was running COVID then. Same MO, died with COVID, died of COVID. It's the lying with statistics that we see over and over again. There's a book that was promoted by Bill Gates when COVID came out, and that book was promoted. And in there, it detailed the fact that the propaganda for washing your hands started being pretty prevalent right when the polio vaccine came out. And so they also, if you had 24 hours to 48 hours of paralytic condition symptoms, and you went to the doctor, they would say you had polio. After the vaccines come out and we have all this propaganda to wash hands, you go to the doctor, same symptoms, 48 hours, they say, come back in 2 weeks. Oh, well, in that 2 weeks, you're washing your hands, you're getting healthier. Now you're not getting polio. It makes the statistics look like the vaccines have
Better.
now eliminated polio. And so it's very similar to this. It's very similar to the, were you connected to anybody in the Holocaust or anybody that had a business during the pogroms, and now you're in the Holocaust. So that
Yep.
expands the numbers so majorly. And you're exactly right there that it's over and over. They do this all the time.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
laughing a lot because it's absurd,
Yeah.
especially from the point of view of someone who, for myself, I've always been good at one thing, and that was history. I'm not good at anything else but history, and history is already complicated enough. But when you tell stories that are such whoppers, that are so ridiculous, like a building that used to be a synagogue was someone tried to burn it down. Maybe actually, we don't even know if someone tried to burn it down, and that constitutes a hate crime, even though Muslims own it now. Like those kinds of stories are just utterly absurd. Plus,
Yeah.
there's like thousands of them. There's not a few. Some of the bigger stories in the U.S., like spray painted swastikas on dorm room doors. That was a big story. Some girl, victim of anti-Semitism, turns out she drew the swastika. I think a substitute teacher, this was LA Times, someone vandalized her car. Turns out she vandalized the car. Jewish guy up in Toronto. I think there were several of these in Toronto. Some guy started to or tried to light a synagogue on fire. Turns out he was one of the people that had a key to the synagogue. So he was a Jewish congregant.
They love
Uh,
fire.
they do like, well, they can't use it some days of the week, but yes, they do like fire.
Yeah, yeah.
And
What about the guy who stabbed himself? Wasn't there a guy who, like, stabbed himself or was like, "I've been" like,
yeah, that
oh
was a
my
great one.
god.
Oh, hell, they stabbed me because I'm a Jew. And then it
Yeah,
turns out the police report says that he stabbed himself. They looked at I think it was his Apple
it's
Watch or his
insane.
iPhone. He stabbed himself.
It's insane.
So
It's just you
so
can't, you can't over and over again. You remember the Canadian shooting that happened recently, and then the guy who gets shot by the police officer, the bystander, happened to be a rabbi walking out of the porn
oh, yeah.
corporation. Like, what are the odds? You got one guy walking down the sidewalk outside of this building, and he's a rabbi outside of a porn place. Like, come on, you
Yeah,
know?
and those stories are put just like the pages of testimony, and just like the 6 million, it's the same thing with these stories.
Mhm.
It's the building up of this idea that there's like all these anti-Semitic attacks, but then when you look at the details, most of the time it doesn't even involve another person. It's a singular person who's Jewish who does something to themselves or their with their own
That's
property.
right.
But just like the pages of testimony can build up artificial numbers, the anti-Semitic attack statistics
That's
are
right.
built up on fabricated stories. One of the other ones, one of the other categories is, of course, the Holocaust narratives, like the guy who claimed that he married his sweetheart after the Holocaust. Like it's the Holocaust love story that Oprah promoted. I forget what the guy's name
Oh
is. It was
yeah.
I think he died somewhat recently or last decade or so. But that story was fake. Turns out he wrote a book, collected money, and it was all a fake story. In fact, most of the Holocaust survivor stories that are published are fake. And I think that the only time that's really been exposed is when there was a woman who wrote a story and claimed that she was survived the Holocaust, and she confronted Nazi officials and told them off. I don't think she was Jewish, and that story became an issue because here's a non-Jew trying to profit from this story, and that's why that became an issue. The other stories of Jews making up these narratives, like Eli Wiesel, for example, that's totally okay, even though most of the stuff that he wrote is completely fabricated. So one last thing on this point is the 6 million number, because I'm sure that people who are aware of this are wondering why I haven't mentioned it, because it's an important point. And that is long before Hitler ever came to power. When Hitler was in the hospital for his medical conditions after World War One, even before that, 20 years, 30 years before that, the New York Times, other publications as well, especially Jewish ones, but the New York Times especially, was publishing articles about how 6 million Jews in Russia were being threatened with extermination. And there's so many of them. It's not like one article. I paid for a New York Times machine subscription. It was like $2 a month to go through their archive. And I pulled so many, I just had to stop, because if I put any more in the book, it was going to be a picture book. There
Mhm.
are literally dozens, hundreds of them that I could pull up with basically no knowledge of what I was looking for. 6 million Jews threatened, and then a lot of them were Jews need billions of. This was in early 20th century terms. Jews need hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to rebuild after Jews destroyed in Russia. So it's the same story.
Right.
Plus, there was a book written by a Jewish author about, speaking of 6 million, it was about the Zohar. And in the book, they talk about, I think they referred to them as gates, something like that. It's called The Wisdom of the Zohar, an anthology of text. I don't know if you ever heard about
Oh,
that
yeah.
book. Yeah. So in
But
that
what
book,
does it mention? It says something about 6 million?
yeah. So I can read you the quote from it. I have it in front of me.
It's not the divine sparks, is it? I hope you don't say that. That'd be crazy.
No, it is divine. It's divine light, but maybe that's the same thing you're referring to. Divine.
Oh my God, are you serious? It is, yeah. There's chaos, and then there's divine light that only gets sent out to certain beings, and then that's how they get the ethno-supremacist concept of their nature. Wow.
It literally. This is what the book says. Quote: There are 6 million open gates, and Anel, the angel, is the chief guardian of them. If you read the entire section in this book, that's just the quotes for context. If you read the entire section of this book, yeah, of course, they're not talking in literal terms. The guy that's writing this book, who's Jewish, he's writing about the Zohar and it being symbolic, which, by the way, I love the symbolic, magical nature of the Jewish traditions, which they took from Babylon and ancient India and the East. But I look at this and I'm reading it and I'm thinking, well, hold on a second. Because essentially what they're saying in the book is, in order to have the Messiah or the Moshiach arrive, there has to be some sort of laying down of 6 million of something, or there has to be, they don't, in the original Zohar, they don't say 6 million. There's like the mathematical term times something that adds up to 6 million. And the Jewish author says, okay, it's 6 million. So you have to have souls pass through these gates, 6 million. So essentially, in other words, they fabricate the 6 million number repeatedly, because if you do this, magically speaking, it is believed that by sacrificing, even symbolically, not literally, these 6 million souls, that you can open up the gate to heaven, force God's hand, and bring the Messiah to earth. Which to the Christians would be the Antichrist, to the Muslims would be the Antichrist.
Wow. I didn't know it was in the Zohar, man. That is crazy, dude. That makes perfect sense, though. That's why they keep sticking to that number over and over again, dude. Because that is the basis of the ethno-supremacist root race concept of like only certain people are divine right to rule. The rest people are sheeple, led to slaughter, led to be herded. This is like the basis of a lot of the mystery cults. It's so wild.
You want to see something real wild? If you haven't seen it yet, or if your audience hasn't seen it, pull up Marla Maples, Donald Trump's ex-wife. Type in Marla Maples, Donald Trump, Jewish text, heart, and you'll find that Donald Trump keeps documents or pieces of Jewish text.
I just saw this recently. I heard
that are sacred to him. Yeah, on a little scroll next to his heart. Yeah, he's a real Christian. Christians typically do those kinds of things.
No, and in his book that he wrote about himself, he talked about a Kabbalah teacher he had that would tell him, and he said, no, it's getting too hard. I can't do it anymore. And he's like, no, that's when you go harder. And, it's interesting, that, yeah, he's very much that's so crazy to me. And that's, by the way, why I made it a K for conspiracy, because Kabbalah is supposed to be with a Q, I believe. That's the Hermetic traditional Kabbalah. Kaaba, the whole thing from Egypt, all that shit. I think that's why they like to use the K as well to mess around with the Kabbalah, because it's like Kaaba, just like Egyptian. That's like the equivalent of like the Buddhist. I'm gonna forget the names, but not the pleroma, but like what am I thinking? You know what I'm talking about? The energies of like of the matrix.
Shekinah, or how do they say it?
The Buddhists have a name for like shit. I cannot remember. It's been so long, but like Duncan Trussell, if he would know. But yeah, I'm not like super into the old mystic Eastern traditions anymore. But yeah, there's essentially it's the same thing as Ka and Ba is my point. And so if you look up at we can look at what Ka and Ba is.
Do you know what the Muslims call the place of worship in Mecca?
What's that?
Al-Kaaba. It's the same spelling.
Same concept. That's kind of what. Yeah. So Ka is the soul, and Ba is, I think I want to say, it doesn't just come right out and say it right here, but
you're talking about like the different aspects of the human soul, or the different parts of the self.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
the
the
life
two sides of the
source.
soul, right? It's like the white, black, left, right. Same thing as you find in Buddhist
It's like
philosophy.
it's Taoism. It's
Yeah.
basically Taoism, the black and white dragon,
This
which
is why theosophy merges all this together under a perennial philosophy, because they believe all of this is really teaching you one teaching.
well, this is an interesting thing that I don't get into details much in the book, although I probably should have. If I did, though, it would have been 1,000 pages. This is something that I bring up on the Secret Teachings radio show a lot, and that is when you trace back even like the Jewish tradition, people say, "Well, they got an amazing history." Well, like, yeah, but most people have an amazing history. And where do the Jews get this information from? They didn't invent it. They didn't create it. In the same
Mhm.
way that Jewish influencers are trying to claim that they invented ramen and sushi today. That's a
Yeah,
thing. They're
that's
trying to claim
hilarious.
they invented Japanese food or even Chinese food, or Greek food for that matter. They also took these quote teachings. Most of these mystical teachings came from ancient Babylon when they were held in captivity.
Right.
And much of what came out of Babylon came out of ancient India, which is beyond far older than anything that the Jews have, like tens of thousands of years older.
You
And
think Babylon's where it got corrupted?
I don't know because I might have a slightly different view on Babylon being the center of corruption because I guess the answer to that question is I really don't know.
Right.
I'm trying. I'm more of like an unbiased computer at this point. I'm just trying to
Mhm.
put in information and see where it goes. But I know what you're alluding to, and I guess you could say corrupted to some extent. Yeah, sure. But
Like
my
Baal and Osirian mysteries, the weird stuff. I know that your opinion on Baal is nuanced for sure. Because, but there is
I
some
would
like
still burn him like the Iranians do. I would still burn that stuff.
well, that's good. Yeah, yeah. Well, I know you said you had an hour. We went a little bit over. I don't want to push you over on your next show. I don't want to cut you off like hard cut off like that, but I just realized we were a little over.
Well, I think we can do at least 90 minutes, and I haven't gotten an email from the other person. I think that they
Cool.
wanted to reschedule, so we can go a little bit longer if you'd like.
Yeah, that works.
On that point in relation to the Ka and Ba and in relation to Taoism, and a relationship to where those ideas come from, I was under I think this is important. I was under the impression that, like, that when I was a kid, the 10 Commandments and all that was like an exclusively like Jewish Christian thing. Obviously, no one bothered to teach me in school that there are legal codes that far predate the 10 Commandments, not just the Code of Hammurabi, for which there is a notice in the U.S. Capitol of Hammurabi, which also the name Rabbi, Hammurabi.
Mm,
Uh, that is what we would call modern day Iraq. But if you
yeah.
go back even further than that, that was the first dynasty of Babylon, which is where probably, that's where the Jews got their ideas from. It's Hammurabi, part of them. But if you go back even further, if you go back into ancient Egypt, the ancient Egyptians had their own set of laws handed down by God. You go back into ancient China, they had the same thing. In fact, every culture, whether they predate the Jews or not, had some kind of divine contact. Just tribes that live in the Amazon. So the idea that the Ten Commandments are like necessary for civilization, like generally speaking, sure, like we probably shouldn't kill each other and we probably should respect, certain groups of people in society, generally speaking. But it's not an exclusively Jewish thing. And so the narrative today that if it wasn't for Judaism, the whole Western world would collapse. It's like, well, the
Mhm.
whole Western world's collapsing because of Judaism. Just like Germany was collapsing because of Jude or, you know, a Sabbatian Frankist version of Judaism, if that
Right.
makes people happier. But if you go further east, like this is one thing that you probably heard me say over and over again. If you go further east, I won't ramble on about this, but just one clear statement. If you come to Tokyo or Seoul, Korea, or Singapore, Korea may be 20% of the population, but Japan, it's like 1%. And Singapore, I think it's like 14%. There really isn't a lot of Jesus. Okay, there's like no Jesus in Tokyo. It's a couple churches. It's nothing in the country. So how do you have a society that famously functions, famously is respectful, famously takes care of the older people, the elderly, the parents, the grandparents, famously has clean streets, famously has virtually no crime, famously has all the ideas that Christianity claims to own without Christianity? Doesn't mean Christianity's bad or even Judaism's bad or whatever. It just means that you clearly don't need a religious system to have that. You clearly don't need some divine law on a piece of, plaster or a piece of rock to tell you to do these things. People can decide on their own. So I think that's an important part of the equation too, because if the argument is Israel is what is saving the world and stopping the evil from spreading and stopping, immorality, it's actually the opposite. They are the immoral ones. And that's kind of how I start the book, is by looking at the history of what the Jews themselves take credit for. And it's usury, which is illegal in Iran. It's the entertainment industry. And with all that money from the financial sector, you have money to finance the movies and now the TV shows. And you have money to finance the magazines and the newspapers. You have money to just buy things up when you don't control them and pay ridiculous prices. Like the LA Lakers were just bought for like $12 billion or something. Just, walking into, I think it was 12 billion, walking into a store, let's say, and a TV's $1,000 and saying, I'll give you 30,000 for it. Because money has no meaning. It's not only is it generally fabricated out of thin air in terms of fractional reserve banking, but you have it, you can print it at will yourself. Money doesn't mean anything. And that's the question to me was always like, how exactly do porn companies function? They have to be self-funded because they're not making money otherwise off subscriptions for $1, $2. It turns out they're funded by Jewish billionaires. Almost all the porn companies are run by Jewish billionaires, or they're run by Jewish people that have those connections. Like, for example, Joanna Angel is a very famous porn woman, or her ex-boyfriend, what's that guy's name? Something Dean. He's also Jewish. Her company is called Burning Angel. I mean, I don't know how much more clear this
Yeah.
can be.
Yeah.
That's just one example. Or someone had sent me this. This is crazy. I can't play it because it's essentially pornography. But someone has sent me a link. There's a recent pornography that came out where literally I should get the audio recording, at least of the acting portion of it, where the woman is literally talking about Jeffrey Epstein and the Mossad and how they're like running the porn industry or something. It's like a big joke in this porn production.
Wow.
So, and then you have the Cami thing I mentioned earlier with Anthropic's CEO's wife, and you have Al Goldstein, and you have the Disney of pornography, and you have Seymour Butts, who did porn with his mom. Like, this is not Muslim. And clearly this is the thing that gets me, is all these things are things that the Christian, 60% of the Christian population in America doesn't like. And yet for some reason, they still think because a verse in Genesis tells them to like a nation state of ethno-supremists, that they have to support all these other things too, like the Rabbi Solomon Friedman that runs Pornhub, or Ravinsky, the guy that died who ran OnlyFans and sent the money to the IDF. I feel like the idea of the propaganda and the psych warfare is simply, it's very simple. It's simply to prevent the mass majority of Christians from rebelling against it and going to war with the Jews like they have been for thousands of years.
That's right.
And then labeling the Muslims as they're the ones that push the gay stuff. They're the ones that push the transgender stuff. Get those evil Muslims.
Yep.
Muslims are most of the time, they're conservative in almost every single capacity, with the exception of like immigration. And that's only because the Jews and the Christians have destroyed their countries and forced them to come to the United States. So
yeah, I mean, there's an aspect to like real
Christian.
there's an aspect to like real Christianity that has been completely obfuscated by 501c3 churches, by eschatological ideas of the Bible, Schofield, dispensationalism, focusing on the Old Testament, even though the whole New Testament completely, the work is complete now. There's no reason to even look at the old now, because the new describes the new covenant, which is now how you can live in Christ, which is like this real version of Christianity, not some weird version that you're getting now in church, which is everybody is in God's church. Like, you don't have to be any kind of ethnic religion. You don't even have to be super dogmatic in Christianity. You just have to walk in the line of the teachings of Christ, and that's it. And it's pretty simple. And people have even obfuscated that. And it's pretty crazy, because now everybody hates Christianity because of the version that it is today, which is not even the real version it was intended to be. It was intended to be a lot closer to your point of the Eastern philosophies and things like that, which are a lot more just grounded in just being a decent human. It's pretty basic. Yeah. So to your point, that's exactly right. They hate Christianity and they have to destroy it. That is because they believe that they have perverted and stolen their teachings. And also, Jesus coming made it to where they were no longer the holders of the law and the chosen people. Everybody became the chosen one in the world. And I don't think they liked that. They pretty much, their inheritance was taken. And so I think that for them, they think, fuck that. He's burning in feces. We're going to take this back over. We're going to change it into our version of us, because they then had to create their own religion after Jesus, because they didn't have any of the, like sacrificing to God was no longer a thing. So they create their own version of sacrifice, et cetera, et cetera. So today's version of Judaism, even the good people that practice it, nothing against them, but I don't even see how it's a viable religion, because if it's based in this idea of like this person that's going to come and serve this, sacrifice for the inheritance of everybody in the world, they rejected that. So then afterwards, if you're still practicing old Judaic practices, I mean, you're not even really, it's not a real religion anymore.
And you don't have to be a Christian to realize that. I was raised Christian. I'm not Christian anymore, but I realize that. And furthermore,
it says that in the Bible, by the way. Sorry, but it mentions Gentiles can be circumcised of the heart and not be like Jews or, Christians, which would be a Christian today.
Right.
So
that's the book of, was it the book of Romans or?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, it's laid out in there, dude,
No, you're right. And so I use myself as an example, but going beyond that, I think it's also very clear to general non-Christians that if you were to just objectively study what Christianity is or supposed to be, the history of it, take out all the good and bad, just objectively look at it. Christianity as a movement, and other movements also like it in the East, predating and post-dating, they are teaching something that is universal, and it is a better idea. It is a more welcoming idea than what the Jewish communities, who, by the way, themselves were at war with each other, than what the Jewish communities believed. So in other words, it's kind of like, it doesn't matter what the belief system is, but it would be like going back at whether it's science or it's maybe it's old concepts of the universe or whatever, going back to something 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago and just holding on to it and saying, no, this is what's true. And you're like, no, we learned recently that the sun is the center of the solar system. And you're like, no, it's the earth. And God said it was the earth, and that's what it is. I mean, it's thousands of years of delusion and psychosis. And I agree conceptually with what you're saying, because what you're saying is that the Jewish religion is, as a result of Christianity, and I'm saying this as a non-Christian, is invalid. Because at the very least, if Christianity is teaching that these old practices, the stuff that you're engaging in, is really barbaric and outdated, and here's a better way to do it, which I would say also, again, exists far in the East, and this is a pretty universal concept. Here's a better way to do it where everybody's accepted, where things like the Promised Land, it's not a physical place. The Holy Land is not a physical place. The Kingdom of Heaven is a physical place in the sense that it's the body, or rather it's the soul of the body that connects to the source. That's the Son of God. The source is Father and the soul is the Son. The Exodus doesn't have to be literal either, because the soul is always an exodus from its origins, and it's trapped in this physical casing like Osiris or any of the other stories of the babies in the basket. So these are metaphors. And I mean, that's why Jesus speaks in parable. These are metaphors. And if you reject all that stuff and no, the Holy Land's this physical piece of geographical land. And the Exodus was like, literally, we were the only people that ever experienced an Exodus, and we were forced out of this land. And this land belongs to us. God said this is our land. I mean, it's not just irrelevant. It's extremely primitive, unevolved, undeveloped, religious, cult-like behavior. It's dangerous, which is why they project this talking point onto Islam and onto other groups as well. And they say Islam is not compatible with civilization. No, Judaism is not compatible with civilization. When you believe that God chose you and you get possession of everything that exists on this planet as a divine right, the land, the resources, the people, the cattle, that's not compatible with civilization. Islam has radical sects. Any kind of radicalism and extremism in Christianity too, that's not compatible with civilization either. But generally speaking, to your point and to the point I'm making, I make the argument in my book, Judaism is not compatible with civilization. So much so that to the point where they will literally kill their own people in order to justify their beliefs, which means that even to their own people, like the belief system really isn't, if they're chosen, why would you kill other people that are chosen? Which goes back to the issue. This can take us to a really important, I think, closing point. It goes back to the issue of the temple, which is a big topic of discussion today. Got to take down
Yes.
ox and build the temple. Like, if you read the original story, this is so insane. It's like with the pornography that was being burned, and they told us it was the great literature of Europe. It's insane. It's about as insane as that. If you read the story of the temple being destroyed by the Romans, the background is really important. The Jewish community was in conflict with itself. Jewish leaders were fighting amongst themselves, which is all the Talmud is. It's just Jews being like, "No, I'm right. No, I'm right. You're wrong. You're wrong. I'm right." And they were killing each other and at war with each other. And the Romans, who famously liked order, they said, "This is a problem." If you read Edward Gibbon, the Jews were in a, I believe he referred to them as a, quote, constant state of rebellion against the civilized world. Everybody noticed this. Everybody saw this. And plus, they had also, the Romans had an issue with the Jews secondarily because the Jews had a plot or a plan to kill the emperor and to take Roman territory, kind of like today. They also had a plan and a plot to kill Muhammad. You can see why they were driven out of Muslim territory, because they tried to kill the prophet Muhammad. He's a pedophile rapist. Well, actually, not really. But even if you agreed with that, that's not really the point. The point is these people believe in him, and the Jews tried to kill him. So that's why the Jews were driven out. There's a reason. And so if you read the story of the temple, they teach this like the Romans marched in, saying Sieg Heil and burning everything in their
Right.
that's not what happened. In fact, the emperor reportedly, but at the very least, the Roman generals like Titus, who also, by the way, is mocked in the Talmud alongside of Jesus in the same section in the Sanhedrin. Titus wanted to preserve the temple. This is well-known history. The Roman general Titus, who became the emperor of Rome, literally wanted to defend and protect the temple, not destroy it. But just like in American history, just like the Battle of Lexington and Concord, they teach us we don't know who fired the first shot heard around the world, or the Boston Massacre. We don't really know who fired first. Probably the British did, but we don't really know what the cause of that was per se. We have an idea of who was shot first, and maybe what the reason was, but we don't really know all the details. That's essentially what happened on the Temple Mount. We don't know who did it. If it was an accident, it seems to be an accident because the General Titus told his men, we want to preserve this structure as both a sign of, one, respect to religion, because Rome was accepting of religion. I know Christians disagree with that, but there's a reason that Romans didn't like the Christians at one point. And also because it's a symbol of our victory, and it's a symbol of our mercy. We're not going to destroy this temple. Whatever the reason was, Titus did not want to destroy it. It's well-known history. It's crazily well-known history. And then somebody at some point, quite frankly, if you want my opinion based on everything we've learned, I quite frankly believe the Jews fucking burned the temple. I think they burned their own temple and blamed it on the Romans because they had been defeated by the Roman armies. That's what I think. I don't have any evidence to support that except all the evidence today that the Jews attacked themselves and claim it was somebody else.
Oh,
However,
yeah. I mean, you're going off of, if you look at their MO for today, right? We've went over a couple instances that they have done similar things. Go over these books real quick. Sorry, my wife needs something. Give me 1 second. Look at these. Go over these real quick for everybody, and I'll be right back because I did want to touch on something with the temple, so I don't want to let you go yet, but I just have to bring this upstairs.
Yeah,
so I want
sure.
you to, you could go over your books and what they're about. Fire books, by the way.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
1 second.
Sure thing. Well, I guess to conclude that thought in relation to the temple, we know for sure that the General Titus wanted to preserve the temple. This is not a debatable point of history. And so whatever was the reason, whatever caused the fire, whether the Jews set it or the Romans, some random Roman soldier decided to burn it. Maybe they were really upset and decided to burn it. It wasn't a policy of the state. The policy of the state was to preserve the temple. So just that alone completely destroys the narrative that the Jews have to destroy the modern Rome because they burned a temple. And I think this is part of a larger issue within Christianity because Tucker Carlson just reportedly figured this out, that if you're a Christian, you can't believe that it's a good thing to build the third temple, because to build the third temple would literally undo the sacrifice of Christ. I mean, and I'm not a Christian, and I know that. So why Christians don't know that or why they ignore that is baffling to me.
But here's the thing that I want to talk about. I'm so glad you're still talking about the temple, because I've got this theory that the digital temple is the plan. So you know all about the exoteric and esoteric, right? The exoteric in this case being the literal third temple in the Middle East being built by destroying the Al-Aqsa or Al-Aqsa Mosque
Mosque.
and then, rebuilding the temple. However, when you look like the Baal room that's set up like the Solomon's temple, and you've got this technocratic kind of AI police state government system being built under it, and you think about this idea of like consciousness being represented by water, which has been pushed forward many times, where consciousness symbolizes or is symbolized rather by water. And we're heading into the age of Aquarius. And so if we were to sacrifice our consciousness into this digital temple, essentially becoming into this hive mind, it would bring back Atlantis, which is kind of their concept of what Atlantis was, not the real version. I've seen a lot of weird theosophical kind of ideology that's kind of led me into this theory that the digital temple is actually the real plan and not this third temple in the Middle East. What do you think about that?
Well, this is an interesting concept. So I think that it's double-sided.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, there's a
Agreed.
lot of sort of mockery and maybe in a sense kind of like a psychological PR where you have the White House building this underground facility. It might even be a data center. We don't really know. They say it's like a
Right.
ballroom, but it has like a military facility underneath of it. And the layout of it, according to the picture that Donald Trump held up to show the media, is very similar. I'm not the only one that noticed this. Very similar to the layout of Solomon's Temple. Very similar. The one that's in the Masonic Bible, for example, you can look at the pictures of. It's very similar to that. And the people they have building it, they fired the original team, and now they have a Jewish guy who is a temple renovator. He renovates synagogues and has him building this, his team building this structure. So I've considered that the building of that temple essentially on Capitol Hill, but at the White House, is kind of like planting the flag on the old Roman Capitol Hill because our capital is essentially built after Rome. So it's like planting their flag there. So I think that's a symbolic gesture of conquering Rome, which is what Benjamin Netanyahu himself says that they need to do, and the rabbis say they need to do. They got to conquer the modern Rome, Edom. That's the United States of America. It's actually many different countries and people. It's a symbolic. It's a symbolic grouping of different ideas and concepts. Like many of the other, there's like, for example, there's the Amalekites, I believe. There's the Nephilim, Geborim, Anakim. There's all these different groups that they have a historical reference, but then today they can also be applied to pretty much anybody who represents the same ideas. Kind of like with, kind of like the idea of demons and possession of the body, and really what those are symbolically, are like conquering, your lusts and conquering your greed and things like this. So it's more symbolic. More occult. So anyway, to answer your question, yes, the planting of their symbolic flag in Rome, I think, is what they're doing in Washington, D.C. In terms of the digital temple, this is something that I've been discussing for a very long time, and I believe that it is the modern AI quantum computer technology. I mean, there's a difference between those two things, but I think it's all of that grouped together.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, no, it's got to be together. Yeah.
I think you probably play this on your show, or at least I played it on my show. I always start with Larry Ellison, guy that founded Oracle, and with the CIA. And he says that most of the AI tech is coming out of Herzliya, Israel. We know Anthropic is Jewish, Meta's Jewish. I mean, Google's Jewish, Alphabet, and Anthropic's, that's the one we mentioned earlier with the wife and the porn company. So these tech companies, alongside of Sam Altman for OpenAI, and OpenAI and Oracle, opening an AI and or Oracle to see the future, or NVIDIA, the evil eye. I don't think they're run by a Jew, but they might be. But those are part of the Stargate project, opening the 6 million gates, but opening the gate. And then you look at like IBM's quantum computer and their quantum, first of all, the chip. And I'll credit the late Kev Baker for pointing this out. The late, great Kev Baker pointed out that the chip of the quantum computer, the IBM computer, looks like an inverted Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
If you
That's right.
Compare it to Kosher, or you compare it, not Kushner, Kusher's work, and you compare it to the Soviet palace that we talked about. But but the system itself is a black cube, and that is the symbol of the Teflon, or yes, for the Muslims as well, it's the Kaaba. If you read Manly Hall talks about in South America, they had a Kaaba, which was like a black stone that was worshipped by some of the tribes,
It's
which
materiality.
materiality, or it might just be the fact of whether you're in ancient Arabia or if you're in ancient America, something falls out of the sky, so it's divine. I mean, I think even the English made isn't there like a dagger that one of the kings had or something that was carved? Maybe the Egyptians had it carved out of
Yeah,
a
Egypt.
meteorite.
Yeah.
Like that's not a unique thing to the Muslims. Or they pray to a stupid rock. Well, like that's pretty much in the context, that's pretty much like what all of human history has been. Like if it comes from the sky, it's divine. Read Charles Fort, for example.
Yeah.
Or Carl Jung, it's divine. It's a gift from God. So
The
that's
stone
not
is
really
symbolic, especially the polished stone. Like when you think of the parables in the Bible where it talks about a polished
oh,
stone.
yes.
And what I think that represents, again, it's kind of like what you're saying, where you overcome your, how should we say this? Like your animalistic tendencies, your lust, greed, all these different things. And the more you kind of generate yourself towards a higher state of being, you're polishing the stone in that process. It's no different than like the philosopher's stone, but it has been idolatrated into this like dark magic, polished stone, like that kind of thing,
Yes.
But there is an aspect to that is 100% true. Yeah.
What is it called in the UK? It's called the Stone of Destiny. I think that's how they
Think so.
crown the kings. So
Yep.
yeah, it's not, my point is always to say it's not unique to the Muslims because I'm tired of
Yes.
Islam being falsely branded with Jewish guilt like the Germans because my ancestry is largely German. So anyway, in relation to the question about the digital antichrist, or you asked about the digital temple, but the digital antichrist I think is part of that.
Mhm.
The quantum computer is a great example of that. The black cube and the inverted Tower of Babel in the case of IBM, and that's called the Q. It's called the Q computer, which is funny, QAnon.
Cute, yeah.
And then you have the development of all this artificial intelligence that supposedly is largely Israeli. I would just assume they stole it from smarter people. That's kind of how I just assume things now, kind of as a joke. But I think that when you look at even what non-Israeli companies are doing, some of them are also funded by Israelis, even though they're not technically Israeli. But you look at what these companies are doing. I mean, let me put it this way: when you listen to people say things like, "I ask Grok" or "I ask ChatGPT," I don't know why that suddenly has become a credible thing to say, or like how Wikipedia has suddenly become a credible source when in school I was always taught never use Wikipedia. Now
I don't
it's
get it, dude.
now it's like if you ask Google Gemini is like, "Oh, that's true, that's not true," and then the source is Wikipedia. So now there's like 2 layers of
Yep.
nonsense.
No, yeah. Or
But
Reddit. It'll pull Reddit. Like,
or Reddit, yes.
this is what, and it's crazy because it drives me. I get pissed off when I see people that I know are reading off of AI to give me information, like whether it's like online or whatever. I'm like, yep, I'm never going to look at this again. Like whatever this person's putting out again, because it's not real. Like you're not giving me any real information that you believe, have any conviction of, or, have even researched for more than 2 seconds. You're giving me a rendition, written by a computer that's been programmed by the same people that are trying to hide or obfuscate this information. So it's just crazy to me.
I'll put it this way. It might be a controversial take, but I'll put it this way. The way that I see these systems is kind of like the porn industry. I'm not entirely opposed to sexual content in a society between adults and people that have made agreements where there's no trafficking and abuse, etc. And there's a fine line in the gray area. There's obviously a difference between Al Goldstein pornography and, say, the Japanese adult video industry, for
Mhm.
example. There's a huge difference between having artificial intelligence or having what they claim is AI or chatbots and LLMs, and having these systems set up so that people can use them and they're just objectively like, I type something in, hey, were the book burnings in Berlin a result of pornography or the great works of literature? And ChatGPT says the great works of literature. And I know that's not true. And I show ChatGPT the picture and ChatGPT says, that's out of context. And I'm arguing with it because it's programmed by Jews to not tell us the truth about those histories. If it was just objective and it just told me the truth, it would be much more useful and beneficial. For the general public, it's meant to be used as a source. And then you read about Brad Parscale, who's the former Trump campaign manager, who was just paid $45 or so million. I think his company's called Clock Tower. to literally, this is not an opinion, literally create fake websites, or they're real
Mhm.
websites, but they're fake content to feed the AI, so that
Yep.
when you type in something about Gaza, it takes you to this Jewish-run website that's really a Mossad-run website. That's the guy that's actually registered as an Israeli agent under FAR in the U.S., Brad, the former campaign manager of Donald Trump. So anyway, what I'm getting at here is the AI or the chatbots could be used objectively, like could be a open source of info and help people get information. The way that they're using it, that's the purpose I think that they've employed it for. But they're also using it, I think, for the same reason that I've used it to find sources. Like in this, it's about prompts. So if you know how to control it, if you know how to prompt it, you
Right.
can get accurate information. So if you use it and you ask it a question, it says whatever, and you say, "Well, show me the source." The source is Reddit or Wikipedia, not accurate. But if the source is you take me to the actual scanned document from like the Department of Justice or the CIA, not saying I trust the DOJ or the CIA, but that's a lot more credible of a source. Take me to the source. You can use it for those purposes. And that's what the elites, that's what the billionaires, that's what the tech people are using it for, I think. But for the general public, they're feeding them all of this slop. So in the same way that porn could actually possibly in a society be argued to be used for release of sexual tension, let's just argue that, let's say, for a very controversial take. I like controversial takes. AI could be used for good, could be used for beneficial purposes,
Hmm.
but it's not. And people are getting the slop version. They're getting the Al Goldstein version. They're getting the garbage. They're getting the programmed Israeli responses. And so I think that in that context, what they're trying to do to answer your question and to conclude my thought, and I assume you'd probably agree with this, I think they're trying to, and I think this ties in with the disclosure of UFOs as well. They're trying to convince people that these things are actually intelligent, that they're actually conscious or sentient, and they're going to try to tie that to something that's etheric or something that's other dimensional, something that's, a ghost in the machine, something that's like alive, something that's godlike, something that's Lovecraftian.
That's
But
right.
you can't talk to it. Only they can. Only
Yep.
Sam Altman
A
can.
hierarchy. They have to create this hierarchical structure that we mentioned earlier. That's dude, I hammer on this so much. And so the back doors go both ways. It's kind of interesting. Remember the Prometheus scandal, right? Where you had like the back doors for the police database that they were using all in different countries that Israel was able to access.
Oh yeah. Oh
Well,
yeah.
they have something similar with flock cameras and this AI surveillance grid that they're building up with Flock, Axon, all these different companies. There's a company called Toka, Toka. Have you heard of this?
I read about that. Yeah, they have access to edit all the videos.
Yeah, an Israeli, I think it was an IDF agent soldier that started this company, and they're working with Flock. And yeah, they can change, edit, alter videos. That way they can make it, look like you didn't commit a crime. Like you could get in there and change shit, which is crazy. It's very much like what they're doing with Wikipedia. But what I was going to point out was that the name Toka, if you look at the name Toka, it means God consciousness, piety or God consciousness, which is very interesting because Taka.
Arabic.
Yeah, Taka. Yeah, Tuka or Tuke. But yeah, so it's interesting to me because all these, this idea of like creating a digital collective unconscious that we plug everybody into, um, is very pertinent in all this AI because I think the quantum aspect, like if our soul is in a quantum place, maybe we have a etheric aspect to ourselves that is quantum in nature, then if you want to create some kind of sentient AI, it would have to have quantum computing technology that would be able to do that. So I think that is why it's all combined. And people like to point out, Christians do, that there's a supposed war with God that Satan wants to perform. And, he describes it essentially describes this technology of like building another Tower of Babel to go up there and war with God. That's essentially what this quantum computer seems to be in a weird way. Now, what that means or what the implications behind that actually look like, I don't know, but it seems to be that is kind of the underlying theme here.
And I believe that on one level, it's a trick because these systems are not intelligent. They're not
That's
sentient.
right.
They're basically glorified search engines. It's basically Google search with, a face on it. Kind of funny, actually. The New York Times published an article a couple of years ago about how most of the AI is basically a Lovecraftian Shoggoth with a
Yes.
smiley face sticker on it. That is basically what this is. It's like a monster with a little smiley face on it. So yes, they're not even sentient. However, that doesn't mean that there couldn't be a sentient system, and that's what
Right.
they're utilizing. And
Yeah.
they're going to utilize that idea at the very least to frame the narrative that they have contact with God or something that is beyond, the earth.
Yeah. Planetary hierarchy.
They're the chosen ones. Only
Mhm.
they can talk to God, whether that's literally the Jews or it's any other group of people. And we get these scripted, framed, nonsense, Israeli-backed search engine results through what are, just manipulated search engines. So I believe that that is what they're doing. That's how this is, at the very least, that's how this is being framed.
Yeah.
And if you want to go a step further, if you look at what the Israeli government has been doing and the rabbis have been doing in relation to those red heifers and the building of the physical third temple, recently there was an article that was published in an Israeli news publication about how they are literally preparing. Maybe they've already done it. No, I guess not that it really matters, but they're preparing to do some kind of ritual that they believe will provoke God and bring about the Meshiach or the Mashiach. If you type this in, Sanhedrin, this is the Jewish rabbi council. Sanhedrin rules it will formally petition heaven to reveal the Moshiach, and rebuild the temple.
Yeah.
So I think they're doing it on multiple fronts. They're doing it with symbolically by conquering Rome and DC. It's being done in a digital capacity with the black cube of the quantum computer and the inverted Tower of Babylon, which means if you invert the Tower of Babylon story, it actually makes, the tower a positive thing, right? Not a bad thing, not an evil thing. And it also means that they're kind of like God reaching down, because that's what it represents, man reaching up to God, but they invert it, so they're God reaching down to man and letting you have the crumbs of Google Gemini and ChatGPT.
Mhm.
Which, by the way, if you take that logo and you flip it, it's the Star of David, funny enough.
That's right.
So
And ChatGPT, it's funny because it's just what it is on its own without changing anything. It is the black cube in chains.
yeah,
They're taking the power, right? And they're enchaining the power. I mean, they're putting it in chains. They harness that power. That's essentially what they're saying with that symbol.
that symbol is
ChatGPT.
yeah, no, I know. I'm saying that symbol
Oh,
is naked for what it is.
yeah,
And then
absolutely.
you look at, I mean, this is this is like such a really important piece of information, and it has nothing to do with my view on homosexuality, because I really, frankly, don't even have necessarily a view, except it's weaponized. I think that you look at Sam Altman and you open AI and you look at Yuval Harari, you look at a lot of these people, even the ones with wives. I don't really buy it. Just like conservatives like Lindsey Graham, don't tell me he wasn't a butt pirate. He was. I think that all these people are homosexual not because they like the feeling of other men. I'm pretty sure they're homosexual because it's an inversion of creation.
Mhm.
And to everything we discussed tonight, the teachings of Jesus or the teachings of even people like Jesus, the things that the Jewish leadership detested, and which is what resulted in the Jews demanding that the Romans crucify Jesus, which is, of course, very clearly stated in the Bible and Pontius Pilate washing his hands. The rejection of those universal teachings and those universal principles, which you find in Buddhism as well, they are something that if you reject them, you're rejecting creation, you're rejecting civility, you're rejecting all things that are decent and all things that are good, you're rejecting all of God's creation. And I would assume that if you put a couple of thousands of years of that belief into practice, a couple of thousands of years of hatred of God and sending the Messiah to everybody and not just us, we're chosen, creates a condition in which you want to destroy the morality and the decency in society. That's why you finance and run the porn companies. That's why you lie to people and publish fake history books like Ghislaine Maxwell's father.
Mhm.
That's why you manipulate people's perception of reality by teaching them fake, just quite frankly, Jew science, just nonsense garbage that is not accurate or true or even logical for that matter, which I believe is also, for the record, partly what the flat earth psych warfare operation that's currently operating actually is. I think that's part of it too. So this is what you would do. And you would also probably be, if I were the devil, you would also probably hate men and women You'd hate men because they typically protect women, and you would create a condition in which men would become feminine. You would teach women that being at home and being protected by a man and having a man pay for things and take care of you and the children financially and with a house, that's actually oppressive. So you would invent feminism. Like the top four feminist, leaders were all Jews, and two of them were actresses, and it was all stage protest, like protest public displays, like street acting, Firestone and the rest of them. You would probably also, because part of that is demeaning and diminishing the value of a woman, because a woman can give birth. She's a portal to the other side, right? The divine feminine concept, which is a universal, it's not New Age, it's a universal concept historically. You would then probably yourself engage in acts that were opposed to even recreational sex. You would engage in acts that are the absolute defilement of God's creation. I think that's why these people are homosexuals. And I think that's why most of those homosexual tech elites are Jews, because they are rejecting creation. And they think, this is not my opinion, this is what rabbis say. Not only are they chosen by God, but God made a mistake. God messed up. Oops. So they can create a better version of God's creation, which is the whole argument of like the technocracy anywhere it exists in the world, yes, Jewish or otherwise. This is a clusterfuck. We can fix it.
That's synarchy. Yeah, synarchist. And it's interesting because that's kind of what Nietzsche said, right? Heather Lynn, she's great lady in this space, but she mentions Nietzsche's quote that everybody knows about killing God, right? But the second half of that quote is more about kind of getting into the idea of like, well, now that we killed him, we have blood on our hands. What are we going to do? So, well, we have to take the office of God, right? I mean, it's beholden upon us to now take that office. And so it's interesting because that's exactly what you're pointing out. And that is exactly the philosophy behind this. It's very Crowleyan, right? The eye of Horus was the brown eye, right? So, you had a little manifestation of creation that would be done into a boy's brown eye, right? Instead of actually creation and procreation, because again, it leads to what you're kind of saying, this idea of like them becoming God through an inverted, corrupted, creationary ritual, kind of sex ritual or whatever it may be, sacrifice, etc. It's crazy. That's what 6-7 actually represents. This big fad theme that keeps going on with kids and schools and everything. This 6-7, right?
I heard about that.
What that represents. And I've got, my son's school, doing shit where they're, 6-7 week. I'm like, well, you're not going to school this week, buddy. And so it's, it's crazy. Yeah, I'm ready to homeschool.
That's probably the better option.
Yeah.
If you can do that in the state that you live.
Some working on it.
There is there's a lot of reference. Just gross, but also funny that you say, the brown eye, because that is,
that's why I said
there's sort of references to that in the Talmud. Like it literally says the rabbis are arguing that it's completely acceptable to rape a 3-year-old, but it actually says, don't worry, the hymen grows back. It's the equivalent of just sticking your finger into someone's eye, and it might water and get red, but it'll heal.
Wow.
And like that's where you get to, it's not just two consenting adults, homosexuals that also want to genetically alter babies in the case of Sam Altman and his husband. That's when you get to the point where it's beyond depraved. Then you're talking about not just even children, you're talking about infants, you're talking about toddlers, where they're like totally acceptable to rape an infant. Not all the rabbis agree with that. And you just watch this, like when you talk about things like that, or you reference things like that, you watch this downward justification. And Talmud doesn't say that. It does. Here it is. Well, that's not what all the rabbis think. What's what some of the top rabbis think, and they're the leaders of the community. So I think that their opinions matter somewhat, but they might not all. They don't all do that. Well, circumcision, they literally suck the blood out of the penis, and that's on the New York State Department of Health website on how to do it in 2026. Well, yeah, but other people do circumcision too. Yeah, but where did it come from? It came from the Jewish cult. Yeah, well, that's. Yeah, but and it just but it just justify. So you have to know what you're talking about, because most people stop at, they don't know where it is in the Talmud that it even says that. And then if you finally get to you get to the final boss, and you're like, I finally got you. You're wrong. I'm right about this particular issue. Oh, well, Muhammad was a warlord pedophile.
Yeah.
And then you
project.
can't even speak to people like that. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of Muhammad, but Muhammad had like 12 wives and most of them were older than he was. That doesn't sound like pedophilia.
Yes.
It sounds like he married a girl because her father wanted him to marry her. And it was an agreed upon thing when all societies, young Japanese girls were taken to the emperor's palace. Same in China. People were taken to the courts of kings in Europe because there was protection and work, and you wouldn't be starved to death in the fields and die, especially as a young girl. So people sent their children to the palace to be essentially workers or slaves or concubines of the emperor or the king. It's not it's a universal thing. It's not unique to Islam. Well, he had sex with her. Okay, I'm not a fan of Muhammad, but the law of consent for sex in Delaware was 7. So I don't understand why it's like a different time period, and it's something that's completely out of context. And yet the Jewish texts say it's okay today to rape a 3-year-old. So it's absurd. And then you just like the context for average people doesn't even matter. It's, oh, you're just soft peddling Islam.
Which side are you on? Yeah, that's right. Because and that speaks again to that dialectic dichotomy that we talked about earlier, where you mentioned to somebody about the Iran war. Well, we would have, the left would have been, look at all these, immigrants. We're getting 10,000 a day. We're coming through the borders. It's like, dude, I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about what's going on right now with the right. Well, yeah, but look at what Kamala would have did. I'm like, man, you're stuck in this weird dichotomy world where like, I'm not even living in that. I'm in this world where both sides are clearly wrong, being rammed by whatever. And you're just stuck in this loop of left or right. And point being, this is why, in the beginning, I was saying that if you need a recalibration on your critical analysis skills or your objective thinking capabilities, critical thinking capabilities, TST Radio is the spot to go, man. Ryan Gable definitely takes a great, any topic. It doesn't matter if it's fucking Dairy Queen ice cream or the Jews and the Jews in Israel, right? It's always an objective point of view of understanding and teaching you how to think. And I've tried to adopt some of that in my show as I go through some of these topics and just try to hold a little nuance in the conversation at all times, and I'm not 100% perfect at it, but you're very good at it, sir. And I really appreciate your work. And, yeah, I mean, we could bring it up for a wrap. I'll go ahead and end it with this. I saved this to point out that, a Jewish scholar was appointed as a Catholic biblical, leader. And then this guy right here, I figured I'd play this. I didn't know that.
That's good, clean fun. That's Rabbi
that's
grinding on a child.
And that's a rabbi, right? So again, when we're talking about 2026, we're talking about the state of affairs with the Kosher conspiracy. Not much has changed throughout history. There's not much new under the sun, is there?
Nope. That's why the same exact arguments are made over and over and over again. I mean, otherwise you'd have to believe that literally the entirety of human civilization, every culture, every country, across political lines, across geographical lines, across language barriers and cultural issues, whether you're some Japanese person living in the countryside believing that the Tengu live in the mountains, or you're somebody in South America believing that there's a cult in the woods that comes out and steals children, which there is. It's called Lev Tehor. Or you're Chabad Lubavitch in New York, and you think that there's like monsters in the sewers, reptiles that come out and steal children, which there are. It's called the Synagogue of Satan in New York, Chabad Lubavitch. Regardless of where you are in the world, this monster manifests itself. And so no matter where you are in the world, otherwise you have to believe that everybody is conspiring against the Jews, which is probably what they teach themselves and teach their children on average, especially in Israel. But that's a very delusional way. I mean, I think we'd classify that as like schizophrenia. Mm-hmm. And the whole world's out to get me. But the other thing is, I don't know why this argument is also some kind of like supposed to be defeating. Oh, sure, but after you say all that, you'll say it's not all Jews. It's not all Jews. It's also not all Christians that believe that building the third temple is a good idea. It's not all Jews. In fact, everything I learned tonight, or that I talked about tonight, maybe 90% of it, almost all of it, I learned from Jews. I learned from rabbis. I learned from Jewish newspapers and Jewish encyclopedias. I just read them. I just didn't believe what I was told by the History Channel and their 5,000 or 6 million Hitler shows. I didn't just believe everything that I was told in history class. I went and read the sources of it. That's where I got the info from. Of course, it's not all Jews. Some of the biggest proponents of what we're talking about are Jews, and that's why that disgusting pervert Rabbi Shmuley goes to New York with a camera crew and gets in the face of protesters who are Jewish, gets in the face of other rabbis, and says, "You're an anti-Semite." Because they don't like I think those are probably real Jews, and Rabbi Shmuley's a fake Jew, like Netanyahu is. And so these parasites that pretend to be something that they're not, they hate the real Jews, whether they're practicing Jews or they're, genetically speaking, the Palestinians, who have more genetic lineage to the ancient Israelites than the people that run the state of Israel. So yeah, it's not all Jews. I would classify them more as, we just like we shouldn't call the Nazis Nazis, because that's not what they were. We shouldn't really call Jews Jews. They're more like, some people call them Sabbat and Frankist. I just call them Satanist because they are oppositional to everything that is God's creation.
That is very true. Great closing statement there. I'm putting the link for your website right now in the description. It will refresh and pop up for everybody listening. I saw somebody was mentioning that they need a link for your show, so I'll put it in here. Ryan's
Thank
show
you.
link in the description right now. Okay, cool. So that's done. And
Thanks for
yeah,
putting
man.
the books up there for people too.
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, yeah, you've got great work. I'm still working on getting a few of your books. As a matter of fact, I've looked at a couple of them. I'm like, which one do I get first? Because like, yeah, like which one do I get first? I'm torn on the Occult Arcana or the newest one, mostly because those two are like my biggest wheelhouses. I'm kind of like you with the whole occult symbological stuff.
I could send you the digital copies at the very least.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Like, I can send them to you after the show. And
That'd be
the other book, Liberty Shrugged, that's an unconventional look at American history using all like National Archives sources and whatnot. And for people that might be more on the leaning to the political right, you might enjoy that book, because although there's a lot of references to, like, a lot of it's the history of the Democrat Party, but once you push through all that, you learn, and this isn't really in that book, but you like recently, I'll give you an example. Recently, there was that Candace Owens, Andrew Wilson debate. And one of the things was like, the Democrats, the Democrats, the Democrats, the Democrats. 79% of the Jewish population voted for the Democrats. Virtually the entire, money supply for the Democrat Party comes from Jewish billionaires, the ones that probably killed Charlie Kirk. The Democrats are the Jewish billionaires. So the history of the Democratic Party is the history of subversion, but it's also the history of, today at least, it's the history of Jewish billionaires that use it as a vehicle to push their subversion, like they did in Weimar Germany. So don't blame the Jews. It's the Democrats. No, it's definitely
the KKK. And the KKK was a military arm for the Dixie Party, which was the same class, same group, the Democrats of today.
Yes, and they also say, well, those Democrats of the South, I mean, they were the slave folks. Well, yeah, but who were the slave folks? Not all of them, but a significant portion of them were Jewish merchants.
Well, yeah, I mean, in the Epstein file, it says we make our money by shipping and trading and merchant, and that's literally how today they still make money like that. You don't think the sex trafficking has anything? It's not the next iteration of slave trading. Come on, get out of here.
That's a whole nother show, because that is what you get with BlackRock and their Jewish president and CEO, two different people, and 4 of their 8 founders are Jewish. BlackRock got control of the Suez Canal under the Trump administration. And this recent issue with Spain, with all these Israeli leaders saying, you better watch out, Spain. You better watch out. Ceuta should be conquered by Morocco. It's really their territory. What if we send the Muslim hordes there to conquer it? And what are you going to do about it? Deal with that instead of talking about Gaza. That's the Strait of Gibraltar. Or if you look at
they win the World Cups. They win the World Cup, by the way. So as soon as they win the World Cup, they just start sending over the illegals.
Yeah.
Fuck you guys.
Shmuley said he wants a refund because Argentina didn't win, so he's asking for a refund.
And by the way, the Straits of Gibraltar were where the entrances to Atlantis was. So when we're talking symbolically right now, did you know that plus ultra is written all over Mar-a-Lago, Trump's Mar-a-Lago? Plus ultra is the inversion of the inscription that is on the pillars of the Straits of Gibraltar, which means don't come any further. Plus ultra means go further, go beyond, right? So it kind of reminds me of all the technocratic Silicon Bros that have their companies where it's like move fast and break things. That's kind of their motto for Facebook and Elon's companies. Move fast, break things. It's like the equivalent of plus ultra. So it's all one accelerationist movement. Now we're into the dark enlightenment accelerationist aspect of this, and it's all one thing here.
I didn't think about
Yeah,
that, but that's a good point, and that probably ties into the Curtis Yarvin philosophy that
yes, it does.
that pushes J.D. Vance
And
and
Jack Parsons, like Jack Parsons, if you go watch like Strange Angels, where it describes his life, dude, they were all about like making math equations to prove he could do rocketry. And he's like, no, come on, let's just do it. You know, if we blow something up, it happens. We'll do it again. That is the logic of all of these guys is just do it. Who cares? Worry about it later. Elon's notoriously like that. And he did something similar to the 100 Flowers campaign. I don't know if he fired the people, but he would have people send in any complaints they had about him or the company. And I think,
Oh, yeah, I heard
yeah,
about that. That's great.
yeah, it's interesting to me. It's like, dude, this is crazy the way they operate. So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah. But yeah, great show. Thank you so much, Ryan. I'll hopefully we get one going on your show soon and you come back whenever you want. We'll talk more.
Yeah, let's do it, and I've heard some things from other hosts, a couple people that I think one person at least had you on their show, and they spoke highly of you, so
Oh, nice.
congratulations with your show. I'm glad that things are going well. Thank you for having me on. For
Of
people that
course.
are listening that haven't heard me before, as you alluded to, I talk about a lot of different things on my show, so if you're interested, yeah, check it out. Listen, I tell people, please listen to the whole show because it's my show's not a soundbite show. It's a 2-hour, process of thinking, so there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, so please listen to the whole.
Very lecture minded. I'll tell you what, though, it is worth it. You know, you get through that because you set the scene. You set the scene in a way that's very nuanced, you know, where you just kind of talk about something and then you're like, oh, okay, I see how all this comes together. And it teaches conceptual thinking and critical analysis. I'm telling you, man, if you need a recalibration on how to think, dude, your show is really where it's at. I can't say
Not
it
what
enough.
to think, how to think. You're right. That's an
That's
important
right.
distinction you're
How to
making.
think. That's right. All right, thank you. And yeah, tstradio.info is where you can find him. And anywhere else, any other plugs?
Nope, there's not really any social media. Been banned from almost everything. There is an X account. I don't know how long it'll be up, but yeah, that's just the website. And then you can also find me on if you type. I mean, it's on the website, but if you type in the Secret Teachings or TST Radio and say Spreaker, TST Radio, Ryan Gable, Spreaker, Apple, Spotify, etc. It's
Nice.
pretty easy to find the show. There are ads in it, so if you don't like the ads, I don't like ads either. You can subscribe on the website. It's pretty cheap to get access to the ad-free version. It's all independent. I don't have $500,000 like Andrew Wilson and
Mhm.
TP USA or TP or toilet paper and Candaceoans to have debates. It's literally me in a room with a bunch of books, and I have no team. There's nothing behind me. There's no money behind me. There's no groups behind me. I don't even have an ideology except Shintoism isn't really even an ideology. So it's just
I
me.
second everything you just said there. That's right. And that's
I
why
know you don't.
yeah. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, no, it's good to have organic, real people out there. So thank you for what you do and all your work, and we'll be
Thank
seeing
you.
you soon. Thank you. Later, everybody. All right, cool.